When I think back to that summer, it still amazes me how calm I stayed through all of it. My name's Nolan, I'm 32, and I've always been the one who plans everything, who keeps track of dates, who makes sure everyone gets home safe. My parents used to call me the glue. I thought that was a compliment until I realized glue just holds broken things together. Anyway, this all started with what I thought was going to be the happiest trip of our lives. My parents had always dreamed of going to Europe, specifically Paris, Rome, and a small village in southern France where my mom's grandparents were from. They used to talk about it like some mythical dream they'd never afford. When I finally started earning enough at my software job, I decided I'd make that dream come true. I wasn't married, no kids, no huge expenses, and I wanted to do something meaningful for once. So I told them I wanted to take them on a 2-week trip. Flights, hotels, everything covered. Mom teared up instantly. Dad patted my shoulder, that proud but awkward kind of gesture he does when he doesn't know what to say. My sister, Erin, just crossed her arms and muttered, "Must be nice when you don't have student loans." She's 29, lives at home, works part-time at a boutique, and somehow manages to make every family event about how hard her life is. I brushed it off. I've been doing that for years. I figured this trip would finally bring us together. Maybe remind us that we were still a family underneath all the passive-aggressive tension. The plan was simple. I'd transfer my parents $9,000. That would cover everything. And they'd handle the bookings with my input. My mom loves planning, so I thought it would make her feel involved. I know, rookie mistake. But at the time, it felt like a kind gesture. The first red flag came 2 weeks after I sent the money. I asked if they'd gotten the flight confirmations, and Mom said, "Oh, the travel agent's still finalizing." Travel agent? I hadn't heard anything about a travel agent. I thought we'd just book online like normal people. But I let it go, figuring she just wanted some extra help. Then Erin started acting weird. She'd drop little comments like, "You know I've always wanted to see Paris," or, "I'm so jealous you guys are going without me." The "you guys" stuck out to me. Not you, not Mom and Dad, but you guys. Like she already felt included. I tried to laugh it off, but a pit formed in my stomach. A week before we were supposed to leave, I called my parents to check if they'd packed. My mom picked up and said she was just ironing clothes for the trip. I asked what time our flight was, and she paused. Not a short pause, but the kind that stretches so long it tells you everything before they even open their mouth. Finally, she said, "Nolan, honey, about that." My heart dropped. "About what?" She sighed. "You're going to be upset, but Erin's been going through a really tough time, and we thought." "Mom, what did you do?" Dad took the phone then, his tone suddenly stern, as if I were the one who'd done something wrong. "Watch your tone, son. Your sister's been struggling. We thought she deserved a break." I felt my pulse in my ears. Deserved a break with my money? She's family. Mom said quickly, like that excused everything. "You're doing fine, Nolan. You have your own apartment, your job, your health. She's just been through so much lately. She deserves this more than you do." I didn't even know what to say. I just sat there, phone pressed to my ear, staring at the wall. All I could think about was the last time they said something like that. When Erin crashed my old car at 19 and they said, "You can save up for another one." She can't. When she dropped out of college and they said, "You'll graduate." She needs support. When she borrowed money from me and they said, "She'll pay you back eventually." Spoiler, she never did. I'd always told myself they were just trying to protect her, that she was the fragile one. But in that moment, I realized what I actually was: the safety net, the backup plan, the bank account with feelings. "Mom," I said quietly, "so you used the money I sent you for my ticket to buy hers?" A long silence. Then a small, guilty yes. I could almost hear her bracing for my explosion. But it didn't come. Something inside me just went still. I think that was the exact moment I stopped feeling like their son and started feeling like an outsider looking in. "Okay," I said finally. "Got it." Mom sounded relieved, like she thought I'd forgiven them. "Thank you for understanding, Nolan. We'll make it up to you." I just said, "Have a great trip." When I hung up, I didn't cry. I didn't even yell. I just sat there, laptop open, staring at the folder where I'd saved all the booking info. Because, see, while I had let them handle the logistics, everything, from the hotel reservations to the flight confirmations, was under my name. My card. My account. I had the power to change things. And that thought settled in my mind like a quiet, dangerous spark. The next few days were strange. Mom and Dad acted like everything was normal, texting me packing updates and even asking for my suitcase recommendations. Erin posted a picture on Instagram of her new travel outfit with the caption, "Paris, here I come." Every time I saw it, that spark grew a little hotter. Part of me wanted to call and scream at them. Another part wanted to cancel everything and let them deal with the mess. But the biggest part, the one that had spent decades being told to be the bigger person, decided to play it differently this time. So I smiled. I texted Mom back, saying how excited I was for them. I even drove over to drop off some travel-sized toiletries. Erin barely looked up from her phone, mumbling, "Oh, so you're not mad?" I shrugged. "Why would I be?" She grinned. "Guess you're finally learning to chill." Yeah, chill. That night, I stayed up late at my desk, staring at the booking portal. The flight numbers, the hotel confirmations, the check-in codes, all of it right there, still editable. And as I scrolled, I noticed something else. They had never changed the emergency contact or main account email. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile forming. If they wanted to play this game, fine. I'd play it my way. But this time, I wouldn't be the one left behind wondering why. This time, they'd be the ones doing the wondering. And when they finally landed in Paris, they'd realize exactly what I'd done. Over the next few days, everything felt surreal, like I was living in two different realities. On the outside, I was calm, polite, and even supportive. I texted Mom every now and then asking how packing was going, dropped off some French guidebooks I had bought months ago, and even pretended to be excited for them. But on the inside, I was burning. Not with rage, that would have been too easy. It was more like quiet disappointment calcified into resolve. That kind of feeling you get when you realize the people who raised you don't actually see you. They just use you when it's convenient. The day before they left, I went over for dinner. It was supposed to be a simple family meal, but it felt like a staged production. The house smelled like rosemary chicken and Mom's fancy candles, the ones she only lit when guests came over. Erin was sitting at the table showing Dad something on her phone. They both looked up when I came in. "Oh, look who decided to show up," Erin said with a grin that was too wide to be friendly. "Thought you'd still be sulking about the whole trip thing." I forced a smile. "Nope, I'm fine." Mom jumped in quickly, clearly relieved I wasn't making a scene. "See, I told you he'd understand," she said to Dad. "Nolan's always been mature about things." Dad gave a small nod, already carving the chicken. "It's just money, son. Family comes first." I sat down slowly, biting back the dozens of responses fighting to come out. Family comes first. What a joke. That phrase had been their shield for years, used every time they favored Erin. When they gave her my old laptop, because she needed it more. When they took her to Hawaii after she failed her classes. Or when they made me move out early so she could find herself in my old room rent-free. But tonight wasn't the night to argue. I just wanted to see how far they'd go. "So," I said casually, spooning some potatoes onto my plate, "you're flying out tomorrow, right?" "Tomorrow morning." Mom chirped. "We're so excited. I can't believe it's finally happening. Paris, Rome, and Nice. It's like a dream." Erin twirled her fork, pretending not to listen, then said, "We decided to skip the little countryside inn. Too boring. I found this influencer hotel near the Eiffel Tower. Infinity pool, rooftop bar, everything." "Oh really?" I asked, feigning interest. "Didn't that cost extra?" She smirked. "Yeah, but Mom said since you booked everything, it's fine. You already covered it, right?" I looked at Mom. Her smile faltered just a little, but she nodded. "It wasn't much more. Just a few hundred." "A few hundred? From my money?" "Of course," I said quietly. "Anything for family." Erin raised her glass. "To family," she said dramatically. Dad clinked his glass with hers. Mom laughed. I just watched them, the sound of my fork scraping the plate a little louder than it needed to be. After dinner, Mom pulled me aside in the kitchen. "Nolan, I just want to say thank you again," she said softly, putting a hand on my arm. "You really made this possible. Erin's been in such a dark place lately. I think this trip might be just what she needs to get her spark back." I looked at her, trying to understand if she actually believed what she was saying. "And what about me, Mom? What do I get out of this?" Her expression softened, but not with empathy, with that condescending pity she always used when I asked for something reasonable. "You get to know you did something good," she said, smiling. "That's more valuable than any trip." I wanted to laugh, but I didn't. I just nodded and said, "You're right. I'll remember that." The next morning, I got a text from Aaron. "Heading to the airport. Hope you're not too jealous. Winky face, lol." Then another from Mom. "Love you, Nolan. Promise we'll bring something back for you." Bring something back. Like a fridge magnet would fix everything. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened my laptop and checked the bookings one last time. Every confirmation, every itinerary, every room reservation, all still under my account. I hadn't changed anything yet. Not yet. I wanted to be absolutely sure I was ready to pull the trigger when the time came. That evening, I went for a long walk through the park near my apartment. It was humid, the kind of sticky summer heat that clings to your skin. My thoughts kept circling around the same questions. Why her? Why always her? Why am I the one who has to understand? I realized I wasn't angry about the money. I could make more. What hurt was how easily they dismissed me, how natural it seemed for them to take without even asking. When I got home, I opened social media. There they were, photos of my parents smiling at the airport, Erin doing a peace sign pose with her boarding pass, Mom tagging me with a "thanks to our wonderful son for making this possible." The comments were full of praise. "You raised such a generous boy. That's real family love. What a dream son." And for a moment, I almost replied, almost told everyone the truth. But then I thought, no, not yet. Because if I'd learned anything from years of being overlooked, it was that timing mattered. Revenge wasn't about noise. It was about silence, waiting for the right moment, when they least expected it. A few days passed. They'd landed safely and started posting nonstop. Selfies in front of the Louvre, fancy pastries, champagne on a boat along the Seine. Erin captioned one, "Manifesting the life I deserve." That one made me laugh out loud. Meanwhile, my phone kept buzzing with calls from friends who'd seen the posts. "Dude, your parents are in Paris? That's awesome. You really paid for all that? You're a saint." Yeah, a saint. Then came the moment that really sealed my decision. 3 days into their trip, I got a text from Mom. "Nolan, can you send another $300? We had to upgrade to a bigger suite because Erin wasn't comfortable sharing the room." I stared at the screen in disbelief. Not comfortable sharing? On a free vacation she didn't even pay for? I didn't respond. 10 minutes later, another message came through. "Please don't make a big deal out of it. You're doing well, honey. You'll make it back in no time." That line, "you'll make it back in no time," hit me harder than it should have. Like my work, my time, my boundaries meant nothing. Like I was just a machine they could press deposit on whenever they wanted. So I decided right then that when they landed back home, they'd finally understand what it felt like to be taken for granted. But the thing is, life doesn't always wait for perfect timing. Sometimes, it hands you the perfect opportunity without warning. A week later, Mom texted again, this time in all caps. "Urgent. Hotel is asking about payment issues." My heart skipped. I logged in to check the booking. The card I'd used was still active, but the hotel system had flagged the reservation because I'd updated the billing details the night before, something that, coincidentally, routed all communication through me. I hadn't canceled anything yet, but the moment had come closer than I expected. For now, I sent a calm reply, "Must be a glitch. I'll handle it." But as I typed that message, I couldn't help the smile tugging at my lips. Because if they thought the hotel glitch was stressful, they had no idea what was waiting for them next. Not when the booking details, confirmations, and even airport transport all ran through one account. Mine. And soon enough, they'd realize that treating me like a backup plan wasn't just unkind. It was a mistake. A very expensive one. I didn't sleep much the night after that billing issue. Not because I was nervous about what I'd done. If anything, I felt strangely clear-headed. It was like all the noise of years of being overlooked had suddenly quieted down into one steady hum of focus. But even as I stared at my laptop screen, watching the cursor blink beside the words, "Payment pending," I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. I wasn't the type to act impulsively. I wasn't going to cancel their reservations just to get a quick burst of satisfaction. I wanted something more meaningful, something that would make them feel the weight of what they'd done. The next morning, I got another message from Mom. "All good now. They said the payment went through. You're such a lifesaver, Nolan. Couldn't do this without you." That last line, "couldn't do this without you," hit differently. Not as gratitude, but as confirmation. They really couldn't do this without me. I had given them everything they had on this trip, and still, they saw me as the afterthought. I scrolled through their new photos. Aaron sipping espresso on a cobblestone street. Mom showing off her new scarf. Dad holding a baguette like it was the Eiffel Tower itself. The captions were what got me, though. Aaron posted, "Finally taking the trip of a lifetime with the two people who actually believe in me." The two people who actually believe in me. That was the moment something in me finally snapped. For years, I'd let comments like that slide. Every holiday, every family gathering, they'd make their little digs, and I'd smile through it, reminding myself, they're family, they don't mean it. But they did. Every word, every joke, every moment they reminded me that I was useful only when they needed something. It all added up. And now they were halfway across the world, enjoying a luxury vacation I paid for, while pretending like I didn't exist. That evening, I got a call from my aunt, Lisa, Mom's older sister. She's the only one in the family who ever really treated me fairly. "I saw your mom's posts," she said without greeting. "They're in Paris? You're not with them?" I hesitated. "No, they went with Aaron instead." Silence. Then, "With your money, I assume." "Yeah." She sighed. "I don't know how you stay so calm, Nolan. Your mom's been enabling your sister since she was born. I love her, but she's blind when it comes to Aaron." I didn't say anything. I didn't have to. Lisa understood. She always did. "Listen," she said finally, "don't let them make you feel guilty. They need to learn what it's like to lose your kindness. Trust me, it'll hit them harder than any lecture." That night, I poured myself a drink and stared at my screen again. The cursor blinked like a heartbeat. I checked the itinerary one more time. Their next stop was Rome, check-in scheduled for tomorrow afternoon. And that's when I made my move. I didn't cancel the flight. I didn't touch their hotel yet. Instead, I changed one small, almost invisible detail, the names on the Rome reservation. I replaced Aaron Parker with Nolan Parker. It didn't matter that the booking was under the same email. Hotels rely on IDs to match names to reservations, which meant that when they showed up in Italy tomorrow, tired and smiling and ready to post another photo dump, they'd find out that their room was no longer theirs. I hit save, logged out, closed the laptop, and for the first time in weeks, I slept like a baby. The next day, around noon, my phone started vibrating on the counter. Mom's name flashed on the screen. Then again, then Dad, then Aaron. I ignored the first few, sipping my coffee slowly, watching the sunlight move across the floor. Finally, I answered. Mom's voice came out high-pitched and frantic. "Nolan, oh my goodness, we're at the hotel in Rome, and they're saying there's a problem. They said the name doesn't match the booking and they can't check us in." I pretended to sound confused. "That's strange. Did you bring the confirmation email?" "Yes, but they said it says your name now." "Why would it say that?" I paused for effect. "Well, Mom, that's because it was originally my trip, remember? My name was always on the booking." Dad's voice came in the background, sharp and irritated. "Tell him to fix it. Now." I could almost picture his red face, his jaw clenched like he was the victim in all this. "Dad," I said slowly, "you used my money without my permission. You took a vacation meant for me and made it yours. So maybe it's fitting that now, for once, my name is on something that belongs to me." "Don't be ridiculous," he snapped. "We're standing in the lobby, Nolan. People are staring. Just fix it before we have to find another place." Mom jumped in, her voice trembling between guilt and indignation. "Honey, please. This isn't the time for one of your moral lessons. We can talk when we're home, okay? Just help us out." There it was again. That tone. Like I was a child misbehaving instead of a grown man who'd been betrayed. "You know," I said quietly, "I used to think I was lucky to have parents who raised me to be kind. But now I realize kindness only works when it's mutual." "Nolan," Mom said, her voice shaking, "don't do this." "Don't what?" "Don't show you what it feels like to be left out? Because I'm pretty sure you already taught me how that feels." Before she could respond, I hung up. For a long time, I just sat there staring at my phone, feeling a mix of satisfaction and something heavier, sadness, maybe. Revenge never feels as clean as people think. There's always that lingering ache underneath it, like an old wound reopening. But the ache was small compared to the quiet peace that came after. I knew they'd find another hotel. They had money, or at least credit cards. I wasn't trying to ruin them. I just wanted them to finally notice what they'd done, to realize how easily they took my generosity for granted. But Erin wasn't going to take that lightly. She never did. Later that night, my phone lit up again. Text after text from her. You're a psychopath. You ruined our trip. Mom's crying. You're jealous because they love me more. Hope you're happy. I didn't reply. Then came one final message. Don't bother coming to Thanksgiving. We're done. And that one made me laugh. Because the irony was perfect. They'd already been done with me for years. They just didn't realize it until now. But then, a few hours later, I got another call. This time from my aunt again. What did you do? She asked. But there was a hint of amusement in her tone. I told her the whole story, from the stolen money to the hotel reservation switch. There was a pause. Then she started to laugh, the kind of laugh you only let out when someone finally does what you always wanted to do. Oh, Nolan, she said, you beautiful fool. You just gave them the only thing they understand, consequences. Her words lingered in my mind long after I hung up. I went to bed that night thinking it was over, that they'd finished their trip bitter and angry, maybe even stop talking to me for a while. But I underestimated just how far they'd go to protect their own narrative. Because 2 days later, when I checked my email, I saw something that made my stomach drop. A notification from my bank. Withdrawal of $2,000. Card ending in 7732. Location, Rome, Italy. That was my secondary card, the one linked to my travel account. The same card I'd used to pay for the original bookings. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I called the bank immediately and confirmed what I already suspected. Someone had used my saved card details from the original booking to withdraw cash overseas. I didn't have to guess who. I checked my phone, and sure enough, Aaron had posted another photo. New hotel. New outfits. Caption, lesson learned. Never rely on anyone but yourself. The gall. That was the moment, the real betrayal. Not the first theft of my money. Not the trip. But the fact that even after being caught, they doubled down. They stole again, confident I'd stay quiet because that's what I always did. And that's when I realized they hadn't just taken my money. They'd taken my silence for granted. That was the day I decided the trip wasn't over. At least, not for them. When I saw that withdrawal notification sitting in my inbox, I just stared at it. It didn't even look real at first. $2,000. Pulled straight from the account tied to my travel card. I hadn't used it since they'd left, and I definitely hadn't given anyone access to it. I must have sat there for a solid 5 minutes, numb. It wasn't the money that made my stomach twist. It was the principle. The confirmation that even after everything, after the confrontation in Rome, after the humiliation of being turned away at the hotel lobby, they'd still found a way to reach into my life and take more. It felt deliberate, like a message. You can't stop us. I called the bank and spent nearly an hour trying to explain that the transaction was unauthorized. The representative was polite but cautious, asking if the card might have been borrowed or if it was linked to any family accounts. I wanted to laugh. No, I said finally, not borrowed. Stolen. They froze the card immediately. I hung up and stared at my phone, waiting for it to light up with some kind of apology, some explanation. Nothing. Just silence. That silence hit harder than any argument could have. The next day, I got a text from my mom. Don't overreact. We needed cash for the hotel after you canceled things. We'll pay you back. No, sorry. No accountability. Just another thinly disguised command, wrapped in the language of family understanding. I didn't reply. I went for a walk instead. The kind where you're not really walking toward anything. You're just trying to escape your own thoughts. The city felt louder that day, like every car horn and chatter on the street was mocking me for being so naive. For years, I'd built my identity around being dependable. I'd been the reliable son, the one who picked up the pieces when things fell apart, the one who could afford to forgive. I always thought that made me strong. But standing there, watching people rush past me on the sidewalk, I realized it didn't make me strong. It made me easy to use. I went home, sat on the couch, and opened my laptop again. Their photos were still everywhere. Erin was posting constantly. Her in a designer dress by the Trevi Fountain, another of Mom with a gelato, Dad holding a glass of wine. The comments poured in. Family goals. So happy for you guys. You all deserve this. And there I was, sitting alone in my one-bedroom apartment, a half-empty coffee mug beside me, staring at the people who had just stolen from me again. That's when it hit me how pathetic it all looked from the outside. They looked like a family that loved each other. I looked like the invisible man behind the camera, the one paying for the picture no one knew he took. The anger that had been simmering turned to something colder. Not rage, not even hatred. just exhaustion. That night, I didn't sleep much. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes of every time I'd let something go for them. The car they promised to repay me for. The time I loaned Erin rent money because she was about to be homeless, only to see her at a beach resort a week later. The time Mom convinced me to temporarily add her to one of my credit cards because it'll help your credit history too. And every time, I told myself it was fine. I was being the better person. But being the better person doesn't matter when you're surrounded by people who don't care about being decent. 2 days later, they got home. I didn't hear from them. No calls, no texts, not even a "we're back safe." Then, a week later, I got a voicemail from my dad. His voice was sharp, annoyed, the way it always got when he was uncomfortable. "Nolan, we need to talk. Your mother's been upset about the way you handled things. You embarrassed us, and it was childish. We expect you to apologize to her and your sister. Call us back when you're ready to be reasonable." Reasonable. That word did it. I didn't call. I didn't text. I just stopped. Stopped answering. Stopped checking in. Stopped pretending that if I just said the right words, they'd finally see me. Weeks went by. My friends started to notice I was quieter, distracted. One of them, Marcus, asked me over beers, "You ever think maybe you keep giving them chances because you don't want to believe they'll never change?" That stuck with me. Because deep down, that's exactly what it was. I kept waiting for some redemption arc that was never coming. Then one afternoon, I got an email. From Erin. "Mom said you froze one of the cards. I had to pay the overdraft fee. You need to reimburse me. It's only fair since you caused it." I stared at it for a solid minute, then laughed. I couldn't even help it. It was so absurd, so beyond reason, that it didn't even make me angry anymore. I didn't respond. Instead, I opened a new document on my computer. At the top, I typed the list, and I started writing. Every single instance of manipulation, every favor that turned into an obligation, every dollar that never came back. The late-night calls, the guilt trips, the emotional blackmail. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about clarity. Seeing it all laid out like that, it was like stepping out of a fog. When I finished, I sat back and realized something simple but powerful. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't dramatic. I'd just been conditioned to believe that loyalty meant self-sacrifice. And now that I could finally see it clearly, I decided I was done bleeding for people who'd never even noticed the cuts. That's when the shift happened. The part of me that used to ache for their approval went quiet, replaced by something steady. I didn't know what my next move was yet, but I knew one thing. They weren't going to touch another cent of mine. So I started closing doors. I called the bank and removed my parents' names from anything they were linked to. I changed every password, set up new accounts, even switched my number. For the first time in my life, I was completely unreachable. Days passed. Weeks. The silence that once made me anxious now felt like peace. Until the letter came. It was handwritten, in Mom's cursive. "Nolan, we don't understand why you're doing this. You've always been the generous one, the glue that holds us together. Families fight, but this has gone too far. Your father, and I think it's time you grow up and realize that money doesn't make you better than anyone. We're your parents, and we deserve your respect. Love, Mom." I folded the letter and set it down on the counter. Respect. They demanded it, but they never gave it. And in that moment, standing in my quiet apartment, I realized this was it. My rock bottom wasn't about losing money or trust. It was realizing I'd spent 32 years trying to earn love that was always conditional. It was the first time I cried since this whole thing started. Not out of sadness, but out of release. Because I finally understood they weren't going to change. But I could. I didn't tell anyone what I planned next. Not even Marcus. I just knew it needed to be big, deliberate, poetic. Something that would make them stop and think, not out of vengeance, but out of shock. I started small, quietly. I reviewed every transaction, every booking record, every receipt tied to that $9,000. There was a trail, and that trail could be useful. I filed a fraud report for the $2,000 cash withdrawal. The bank confirmed they'd open an investigation. Then I started digging deeper, not into their finances, but into their comfort zones, the things they took for granted. Because if they wanted to teach me that family comes first, I was going to teach them what happens when the person who's always first to forgive stops forgiving. It wasn't about hurting them. It was about showing them who I became once I finally stopped being the glue. The funny thing about walking away is that at first it feels like failure, like you've lost something that should have mattered. But a few weeks after cutting them off, I realized that losing my family's approval wasn't really a loss at all. It was a weight lifted. The peace was strange at first. My phone didn't buzz every few days with guilt-laced requests. No one called to remind me that Erin was struggling again, or that Mom's credit card got declined and she just needed a little help. The silence, once unbearable, became comforting. It was mine. I started filling the space they left behind with things I hadn't done in years. I signed up for a photography class. I took early morning walks by the river instead of checking my emails half awake. I started cooking again, not out of necessity, but because I enjoyed it. I even began traveling, short trips at first, a weekend in Lisbon, a few days in Prague. Places I'd always wanted to see, but never prioritized because I was too busy working, saving, or paying for someone else's dreams. The first time I boarded a plane with my own ticket, I almost laughed. It felt poetic. The son who'd paid for everyone else's vacations finally taking one for himself. I posted one photo from Lisbon. Just one. A quiet street at sunset, no caption. An hour later, my phone buzzed. A text from Erin. Wow, must be nice. Using our family money for solo trips now? I didn't respond. I just blocked her number. It was that easy. Meanwhile, my life started to take shape again. Work picked up. I'd been with the same software firm for years, but I'd never really pushed for anything more because, subconsciously, I didn't believe I deserved more. That changed. I took on new projects, started leading a small team, and by the end of that quarter, my boss called me in for a meeting. He smiled when I sat down. You've been killing it lately, Nolan. We've noticed. You ever thought about heading up your own division? For a moment, I didn't know what to say. Me? The quiet guy in the corner, the one always saying yes to everyone else? The one who used to send half his paycheck to his parents every month out of habit? I nodded slowly. Yeah, I said. Yeah, I think I have. By the end of that week, I had a new title and a salary increase that still makes me shake my head when I think about it. But more than the raise, it was the freedom that came with it, the sense that my time was finally mine again. Around that same time, I started dating someone new. Her name was Claire, a journalist I met at a mutual friend's dinner party. She had this calm, grounded energy that pulled me in immediately. Our first date was simple, coffee and a walk around the city. But for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to prove anything. I didn't feel drained or on guard. When I told her about my family, she didn't interrupt. She just listened. And when I finished, she said, "You didn't lose a family, Nolan. You lost a hierarchy that kept you small." That stuck with me. Over the next few months, things only got better. I bought my first home, a modest but beautiful townhouse near the park. Not because I needed to prove anything, but because I wanted a place that was truly mine. I filled it with small things that made me happy, framed photos from my trips, plants I actually remembered to water, a record player that hummed old jazz records late at night. Every time I unlocked the door after work, it felt like exhaling after holding my breath for 32 years. Then one day, a letter arrived. Not handwritten this time. Typed, neat, official looking. From my bank. The fraud investigation had concluded. The $2,000 withdrawal in Rome had been traced, complete with camera footage from the ATM. The report attached showed exactly what I already knew. My sister, withdrawing the cash with Mom standing right beside her. The bank confirmed they'd refunded the money to me and noted that, should I choose, I could pursue further legal action. For a moment, I just stared at the paper. Not in anger, not even satisfaction, just clarity. They'd always acted like I was too soft to stand up for myself, too forgiving to ever draw a line. But now, I had proof of what I'd known all along. They didn't see me as family. They saw me as funding. I didn't file charges, not yet, anyway. But I made a copy of everything. Every receipt, every message, every email. Because somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. Then, about 3 months later, I got a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something made me pick up. It was my dad. "Son," he started, his voice unusually formal. "We'd like to talk. In person." I didn't say anything. "Your mother's been upset. We all have. We want to move past this. Erin's been struggling again, and..." There it was. The real reason. Not reconciliation. Not remorse. Another setup. I cut him off. "You know what, Dad? I'm glad you called. Because there's something you should know." He hesitated. "What's that?" "I'm done. Done. Yeah. Done fixing everything. Done paying for your mistakes. Done pretending we're something we're not. Whatever struggles Erin has, they're hers, not mine. He sighed. You've changed, Nolan. I had to. And I hung up. That night, Claire came over. I told her about the call, and she smiled in that gentle way of hers, setting down a bottle of wine. Change is uncomfortable, she said, especially for the people who benefited from your old self. I looked around my home, at the life I'd built piece by piece, and realized she was right. I wasn't the same person anymore. I'd grown into someone who didn't flinch when people disapproved of him, someone who didn't need validation to feel whole. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was coming. That call from my dad, the way he'd phrased it, the tone, it wasn't just a plea. It was preparation. And I was right. 2 weeks later, I got an email from my parents' lawyer. Apparently, my grandfather's estate, the one they'd always said wasn't much, had finally settled after years of probate. It turned out it was much. A small fortune, actually. Enough to change lives. The lawyer wanted to confirm my attendance at the family meeting scheduled for next month. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. It was almost poetic. After everything, life had given me a seat at a table they once tried to push me away from. Claire looked over at me. What's wrong? I smiled slowly. Nothing. Actually, everything's finally right. Because for the first time, I wasn't going into that room as the forgotten son, the quiet provider, or the bank account they could guilt into obedience. I was going in as the man who'd rebuilt himself, one who didn't need their approval, or their inheritance, or their apologies to feel powerful. But they didn't know that yet. And when they saw what I'd done with my life, how far I'd come without them, I knew it would sting far worse than any revenge I could have planned back when I was angry. Still, part of me wondered what exactly they were planning. The timing, the sudden invitation, the lawyer involved, it didn't smell like reconciliation. It smelled like strategy. I closed the laptop and leaned back, the corners of my mouth curving into a quiet smile. They thought they still had control, that I was the same old Nolan, the one who'd fold the moment they said family. But that version of me didn't exist anymore. And soon, they'd see that for themselves. The letter from my parents' lawyer sat on my desk for a few days before I opened it again. The paper felt heavy, official, that thick kind of cardstock lawyers use when they want you to take something seriously. I reread every line carefully, half expecting it to vanish like some cruel joke. But it was real. My grandfather's estate, the same one my parents had always downplayed, had finally gone through probate. There was money involved. Real money. A house, land, and several investment accounts. Enough to make everyone sit up straighter when they heard the numbers. The meeting was scheduled for the following month at the attorney's office downtown. The email said all relevant family members were expected to attend. Relevant. That word lingered. A few years ago, I might have second-guessed my place in that category. But not anymore. I poured myself a coffee, sat back, and thought about how strange life had become. Less than a year ago, I was the quiet one, the peacemaker, the fixer, the person who never made a scene, the kind of man who'd rather take the hit than argue. And now here I was, staring down a meeting that could change everything, not because of the money, but because of what it represented: leverage. See, money had always been the currency of power in my family. My parents used it to control, to guilt, to remind me who I owed. And when I finally earned enough of my own, they found ways to take it under the guise of family fairness. But this time, the money wasn't theirs to twist. It was coming from my grandfather, a man who, ironically, had always told me to never let sentimentality cloud your judgment. He wasn't affectionate, but he was sharp, practical. When I was a kid, he'd let me sit in his workshop while he repaired old radios. He'd hand me a screwdriver and say, "Everything breaks eventually, Nolan. The trick is knowing what's worth fixing." At the time, I thought he meant machines. Now I knew better. I decided to do a little research before the meeting. I wasn't about to walk into another family ambush blind. A week later, I called the attorney's office, not the main number, but the one listed on the letterhead. A woman named Sandra answered, her tone brisk but polite. "Law offices of McCarthy and Dean. How can I help you?" "Hi," I said. "My name's Nolan Parker. I received notice about the estate of Richard Parker. I just wanted to confirm I'm on the attendance list for the meeting next month." "Let me check," she said, typing. "Ah, yes. You're listed as a beneficiary." That word, beneficiary, made my pulse quicken slightly. "Could you tell me in what capacity?" I can't disclose details until the meeting, she replied. But I can tell you this. Mr. Parker specifically mentioned you in his will. That stopped me cold. He did. Yes, sir, she said, her voice softening slightly. Quite directly, in fact. I think you'll find it interesting. We hung up, and I sat there for a long time, staring at the wall. My grandfather had mentioned me by name. That man barely talked about feelings, let alone family drama. So for him to single me out in something as serious as a will, that meant something. I couldn't stop wondering what he'd said. Over the next few weeks, I started noticing something odd. My parents were trying to warm back up to me. It started with a text from Mom. Hope you're doing okay. We'd love to see you before the meeting. Maybe dinner? Then Dad sent one too. Let's put all this behind us, son. Family's family. It was almost funny. Months of silence, no apologies, and now suddenly they were sentimental. Claire noticed it right away. They're worried, she said one night, sipping her tea across from me. They know something about that will. Maybe they're not as secure as they think. She was probably right. My parents were many things, selfish, manipulative, controlling, but never stupid. If they were reaching out, it wasn't out of love. It was out of fear. So I played along. I texted back, sure. Dinner sounds good. We met at their house the following Sunday. I hadn't been there in months, and walking through the front door felt weird, like stepping into a museum of my old self. Everything looked the same. The framed family photos, the smell of my mom's cooking, but it didn't feel the same. I wasn't that boy anymore. Mom hugged me like she always did, too long, too tight, the kind of hug that tried to erase history. It's so good to see you, she said. Dad patted my shoulder. You look good, son. Work's treating you well. Better than ever, I said with a polite smile. Aaron came down the stairs a few minutes later, wearing that same smug smirk that always made me grit my teeth. Look who decided to show his face, she said. Nice to see you too, Aaron, I replied evenly. Dinner was awkward. They tiptoed around anything meaningful, filling the silence with small talk. The trip to Europe wasn't mentioned once. Neither was the money. But I could see it in their eyes, the nervous energy of people who knew they were sitting on a secret. After dessert, Dad leaned back in his chair, clearing his throat. So, Nolan, about your grandfather's estate. We don't know the details yet, of course, but we just wanted to make sure we're all on the same page. No surprises. I raised an eyebrow. What kind of surprises? Mom smiled tightly. Oh, you know how these things go. Grandpa had his ways. We just think it's important to stay united, no matter what. United. I almost laughed. Aaron crossed her arms. He probably left it all to charity anyway. He never liked any of us. Dad shot her a look. Don't say that. I watched them quietly, letting the tension hang. Then I said, you don't have to worry about me. Whatever happens, I'll handle it just fine. And I meant it, because I wasn't walking into that meeting as their son anymore. I was walking in as a man who knew exactly who he was, what he was owed, and what he was capable of. A week before the meeting, I got a call from Sandra again. Mr. Parker, I just wanted to confirm your attendance for next Wednesday. I'll be there, I said. There's also a private note from your grandfather that's to be read only by you after the main meeting. It's part of his instructions. That made me pause. A private note? Yes. Sealed envelope. He left very specific directions. When I hung up, I felt a strange mix of curiosity and anticipation. My grandfather wasn't the sentimental type. If he'd left a note, it wasn't to say, I love you. It was for a reason. Maybe a warning. Maybe an opportunity. Claire noticed I was distracted that night. You keep tapping your fingers, she said softly. I smiled faintly. Just thinking. About the will. About what comes after. She tilted her head. You already have a plan, don't you? Not yet, I said. But I will. The night before the meeting, I couldn't sleep. I found myself replaying old conversations with my grandfather, small, seemingly random things he'd said over the years. Once, when I was 16, he'd told me, you've got your father's patience and your mother's heart. That's a dangerous combination if you're not careful. The world will take and take until you learn to say no. I never forgot that. When morning came, I put on a suit. Not flashy, simple, well-fitted, confident. Claire squeezed my hand before I left. Remember, she said, you're not walking in there to fight. You're walking in there to be seen. The law office was on the top floor of an old brick building downtown. The receptionist led me to a conference room with glass walls and a long mahogany table. My parents were already there, sitting side by side, whispering. Erin sat across from them. Scrolling through her phone like this was just another inconvenience. When they saw me, the room went quiet. Mom smiled first. "You made it." I nodded. "Wouldn't miss it." The lawyer, Mr. Dean, walked in moments later, a tall man with graying hair and the kind of voice that commanded attention. He greeted us politely, then got straight to business. "As you know, Richard Parker left behind several assets, including property, savings, and business investments. He was meticulous in outlining how he wanted these distributed. He opened a folder, adjusted his glasses, and began reading. To my son, Harold Parker." That was my dad. "I leave the family property on Willow Creek, along with the remaining balance of my retirement fund." Dad nodded, trying to look stoic. "To my daughter-in-law, Margaret Parker, I leave the art collection and jewelry in storage." Mom exhaled in visible relief. "And to my granddaughter, Erin Parker." Mr. Dean paused. "I leave the Mercedes-Benz in my garage and my personal library, which I hope she will one day learn to appreciate." Erin's jaw tightened. "That's it," Mr. Dean continued without looking up. "And finally, to my grandson, Nolan Parker." The air in the room shifted. Everyone looked at me. "I leave the controlling interest in Parker Holdings LLC, including all associated assets, accounts, and deeds currently under its name." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Mom blinked. "What?" Mr. Dean looked up calmly. "That includes the land in North Haven, the apartment building in Boston, and the investment accounts totaling approximately." He checked a page. $3.6 million. My heart thudded. Dad's face went pale. That's not possible. Parker Holdings was just a small business account." Mr. Dean smiled faintly. "Not anymore. Your father expanded it significantly over the past decade, and he placed it all in Nolan's name as of his final amendment." I sat there, still my mind spinning. $3.6 million. I looked at my parents. Their faces were frozen, shock, disbelief, and something else underneath, fear. That was the moment I realized my grandfather hadn't just left me money. He'd left me power. And suddenly, the dinner invitations, the soft apologies, the sudden warmth, it all made perfect sense. They'd known. They'd been trying to get ahead of it. But it was too late, because I wasn't the same Nolan they thought they could manipulate anymore. And as the meeting ended, Mr. Dean handed me the sealed envelope Sandra had mentioned. My grandfather's handwriting was on the front, for Nolan. "Only when you're ready." I slipped it into my jacket pocket without opening it, because I already knew what it said, at least the spirit of it. He was telling me what he'd been trying to teach me all along. That some things aren't meant to be fixed. Some things are meant to be replaced. The weeks after the meeting felt like the calm before something big. Not the heady, chest-tight excitement of scheming, but the slow, meticulous calm of someone assembling a clockwork mechanism. I'd never been one for dramatic speeches or public scenes. My grandfather knew that about me. That's probably why he left me the keys to Parker Holdings. He wanted results, not noise. So that's what I set out to deliver. First, I hired people. Not the angry, headline-chasing types you see in movies, but quiet professionals who liked paperwork and neuron-frying detail. A corporate lawyer who smelled faintly of lemon and always carried 2 pens. A forensic accountant who treated ledgers like puzzles and smiled when she found things that didn't add up. An estate planner who could translate wills into locking mechanisms. I briefed them all in the same clipped way I briefed my team at work. Here's the objective. Here's what I have. Here's my tolerance for theatrics, 0. They nodded, took notes, and got to work. The first task was mundane but essential. Make sure the company was actually under my control. Forensic corporate housekeeping, I called it to myself. I filed resolutions, convened an emergency board meeting. I was the controlling interest. The bylaws were clear, replaced the old signatories on the company accounts, and changed the authorized users on every corporate card. Those changes took a few days and a stack of signatures. But once they cleared, every stream of money that had previously been an open tap to mom and dad, corporate reimbursements, petty cash, credit lines, was locked down behind passwords and approvals that only I controlled. People who've never had to put bricks down one at a time underestimate how satisfying paperwork can be. The bank calls were polite. The clerk at the title company hummed sympathetically when I told her to hold the transfer until further instructions. I set up alerts on every account so I would be notified, in real time, whenever money moved. It was tedious, surgical work, the exact kind of work my family always assumed I'd do without thinking. Now they'd see that my thinking had a plan. While the accountant dug through years of corporate expense reports and personal reimbursements, she unearthed things that made my jaw tighten and then go slack with relief. There were patterns, reimbursements that matched vacations, office supplies that lined up suspiciously with a boutique's charge history, transfers that had been routed in ways designed to obscure the beneficiary. Nothing dramatic enough to make police sirens wail immediately, but enough to create leverage. Enough to show a clear trail from the corporate coffers to personal weekend trips, fancy dinners, and, ironically, the same travel agent who had booked the Paris trip. In short, evidence of careless, if not deliberate, misappropriation. The Rome ATM withdrawal, once traced, was the cherry on top, a small, clumsy crime captured on camera that tied a face to a transaction. We had receipts that matched that week's hotel charges, and we had timestamps that didn't lie. I didn't rush to use any of it. That would have been the easy, sloppy revenge, the kind that feeds ego and leaves collateral damage. I wanted something that felt clean, proportional, and unforgettable. I wanted consequences that fit their behavior, not public shaming or ruin, but a restructuring of incentives so sharp it would force them to reckon with what they'd always taken for granted. Next, I reorganized Parker Holdings distributions. The company owned a few tangible things my parents had assumed were theirs to enjoy. The little cottage on Willow Creek Dad liked to bring guests to, the Mercedes that sat idle in our garage, and, of course, the account lines that had funded more than one emergency over the years. Using the corporate governance mechanisms my grandfather had set up and the legal counsel on retainer, I passed a resolution to move certain assets into a newly created family trust with strict terms. The trust's purpose, I wrote with a lawyer hovering over my shoulder to ensure the pros would hold up in court, was to preserve assets for the long-term well-being of beneficiaries who met specific conditions. Conditions like documented financial responsibility, completion of financial counseling, and a formal repayment schedule for any previously misappropriated funds. I watched the faces of the lawyer and accountant as I signed the trust documents. They were the same faces I saw at work when a risky project finally had the right risk mitigations in place. Serious, satisfied. Paperwork does something to a person. It makes intent concrete. Then I made my move, but I did it slowly and silently. Instead of storming into the living room with a stack of accusations, I started with email. A short, calm message to Mom and Dad. We should talk about the company's new structures. Can you meet me at the office on Thursday at 2? That sounded so innocuous I almost didn't send it. They answered quickly. The tone was wary but conciliatory. They wanted to appear reasonable. Fine. The office meeting was clinical. I explained, calmly and without theatrics, that I'd exercised my rights as controlling interest to update company policy, authorize a forensic audit, and create a trust for certain assets. I walked them through the trust criteria step by step, handing them printed copies so they could see every line. I presented the bank statements that clearly correlated corporate funds to personal expenses. I didn't yell. I didn't accuse them of being monsters. I laid out facts. Facts are difficult to deny. I could see Mom's eyes go glassy when she realized this wasn't a conversation she could talk her way out of. Dad tried to interrupt twice, voice rising, but I held up a hand and asked him to wait until I'd finished. When I finished, I did something small that felt enormous. I offered them a way to make it right that didn't hinge on public shaming or legal punishment. Repayment. A realistic schedule based on incomes and obligations. Enroll in financial counseling. Formal forgiveness in exchange for formal restitution. It was a businesslike, almost generous arrangement, an opening that left dignity intact if they chose to take it. That's the thing about consequences that are measured. They force the person who's been taking for granted to become accountable in a way that words never do. You can beg forgiveness into someone's ear all you want, but you can't beg your bank account to show mercy. Numbers don't care about your excuses. Erin's reaction was predictably venomous. She paced, fingers drumming on the table, insisting I was overreaching, that the Mercedes was a sentimental item Grandpa would have wanted her to have. "You're stealing from me," she said at one point, voice hysterical. "You don't get to decide what Grandpa meant." "I'm following the will," I replied. "And I'm following the law. If you want to contest anything, You're welcome to go through the legal channels. But you'll have to show cause. The quiet in the room after that was the sort that speaks louder than anything either of us could have shouted. I could have stopped there and let the trust do its work. That would have been enough for most people. But my grandfather didn't want half measures, and neither did I. He had left me not just funds, but the authority to fix a system in which generosity had become a liability. I wanted the lesson to be undeniable. So I set up 2 additional moves, ones that required a level of patience I didn't know I had. First, I changed the company's charitable giving and renamed the beneficiary to a scholarship fund in my grandfather's name. A small, local scholarship for hardworking young people from our town. I allocated a portion of the company's dividends to seed it and set the scholarship application bar high. Candidates had to demonstrate financial responsibility, community contribution, and a clear plan for their future. I arranged for Aunt Lisa, the only family member who'd treated me like an equal, to be on the selection committee. It was quiet, clean, and deeply aligned with the grandfather I remembered, practical generosity, not theatrical pity. Second, I invited them, everyone, to a family meeting at a community center, which I framed as a chance to announce the scholarship and talk about legacy. It sounded wholesome and bureaucratic. They accepted, thrilled that the family would again be united and happy. I booked the community room, arranged the refreshments, and printed a short program. In that program, tucked between the checklist and the thank yous, was a single line, a request that anyone who had benefited from Parker Holdings in the past 3 years disclose the nature and amount of that benefit in writing, as part of the foundation's transparency policy. It was the sort of bureaucratic request that sounds reasonable until you realize it's a formal mechanism that triggers accountability. When the day came, they arrived in smiles that were brittle and rehearsed. Mom clutched a bouquet she'd dragged from the house as if appearances could rewrite history. Erin had on the same posture she always put on when she wanted admiration. Dad shuffled through the room looking annoyed at the chairs, but proud in the way people are proud when they think things are still under their control. I stood at the front, introduced the scholarship, told a quiet story about my grandfather's workbench and the way he taught me to measure twice and cut once. I watched their faces as I spoke, Mom's eyes shifting, Dad's jaw tight, Erin's forced smile. Then, at the end, I asked for disclosures. The room hummed, the air thinned. Paper rustled. My mother's handwriting was already on the disclosure form she handed to the assistant at the table with a slightly trembling hand. Erin scoffed and scribbled something in a hurry. What they didn't expect, and what made my chest light with a peculiar, calm thrill, was that I had one more card to play. A quiet press of the button that would make their choices irreversible unless they took the path I had offered them. I had consulted with counsel and set a contingency clause in the trust that required no immediate public action, but automatically initiated a formal restitution plan if the disclosed amounts didn't align with the corporate records. It would be a legal mechanism, not revenge for the sake of spectacle, but a contract that converted their casual taking into enforceable debt unless they voluntarily made amends. I watched Erin's handwriting slow, then stop, then start again. Mom's face flushed. Dad's throat worked. There was a long moment where the only sound in the room was the air conditioner and the distant laughter of kids passing outside. That was the moment I wanted. The moment when their comfortable narrative, that I was the generous fool who would always take them back, finally slipped and exposed them to the practical consequence of their actions. Just as I was about to say something small, to puncture the silence with a single clarifying sentence that would make everything immediate and inescapable, the door opened. A woman from the bank I'd been working with stepped in, an issue in her hand, and her expression told me she'd found something new. She walked straight to the podium, handed me an envelope, and said, "I'm sorry to interrupt, Mr. Parker. We found a reconciliation error in the international transfers related to last summer's travel bookings. It's complicated. You might want to see this." I slid the envelope open with my thumb, feeling the edges of the paper like the turning gears of a machine I'd built. Inside was a printout, a timeline of transactions, timestamps, and a file name that made my breath catch. The reconciliation pointed to a sequence of transfers that aligned with the Rome withdrawal and other charges. Transfers that suggested not only casual misuse, but a deliberate pattern of rerouting funds in ways designed to stay under the radar. It was what the accountant called a smoking trail. It was also what, in the hands of a careful operator, could be used to force full financial disclosure and, if necessary, criminal proceedings. I glanced up at my parents, at Aaron. They were pale. Mom's hands gripped the bouquet so hard the stems bent. Dad looked like a man who had realized a chessboard had been set up without his awareness. I hadn't planned for the bank to show up that day. That was the thing about the world. It sometimes does the final part for you, if you let it. The machinery I'd put in motion, the audit, the trust, the scholarship, the disclosures, had been steady and intentional, and now it had produced a lever that would make their choices have real, legal consequences. I could feel the room tilt, the air crackling with the question that hung in everyone's mind. What would I do next? I folded the printout, slid it back into the envelope, and smiled. It was the kind of smile that felt like the exhale after a held breath. Then I looked at them, at the family who had treated kindness as a resource to be mined, and I said, in a voice calm enough that no one could call it melodramatic, "We'll start with the disclosures. After that, we'll reconcile everything. You can choose to make things right, or you can choose otherwise." Aaron's face blazed, and Dad's lip trembled. Mom's eyes filled. Someone in the back cleared their throat. I left the rest of the sentence unsaid. I didn't have to. The envelope in my hand said everything the rest of my mouth could. The room held its breath with me. And then, just as the first person opened their mouth to speak, the building's fire alarm shrieked, cutting the moment into jagged pieces. People jumped. Chairs scraped. Someone shouted about the sprinkler system. The bouquet in Mom's hands soaked through in an instant. The interruption was absurd and perfect. It bought me a sliver of extra time, and I needed it, because what I planned to say next would change everything. The fire alarm did exactly what alarms do best. It turned the room into chaos and bought me the extra minute I hadn't known I needed. People stood, phones in hands, some laughing nervously, some cursing the inconvenience. Sprinklers hissed, water beaded on the program pages. Mom clutched her soaked bouquet like a prop in a play that had suddenly broken. Aaron shoved her disclosure form into her purse as if it were poison. Dad looked like he'd swallowed a lemon whole. I walked to the receptionist's desk, took the envelope the bank rep had given me, and slipped it into my jacket. The sprinkler mist caught at my hair. The dress shoes of half the room left black fingerprints on the linoleum. Outside, someone joked that this was the most exciting family meeting ever. Nobody laughed. Not really. When the building manager announced, with all the authority of someone who does this for a living, that there was no fire and we could go back inside, the room slowly receded. The damp made the air feel sharp and honest. No one wanted to be the first to pick up the thread, but we were already tangled in it. I stood up. I let my voice fill the room. Not loud, just steady. "We were interrupted," I said. "We'll pick up where we left off." The undercurrent of whispers quieted. The community center chairs squeaked as people leaned forward. I felt like a conductor about to cue an orchestra I hadn't written the score for, but in which every musician already knew the first movement. Mr. Dean cleared his throat and asked if I wanted to present the reconciliation printout in front of everyone. I said yes, because while the envelope had been a private thrill, evidence in hand, this was never about a private victory. It was about holding the family to the same standard I had to hold myself to, enforcing transparency in a house built on secrecy. The printout was worse for them than I expected. It mapped, transaction by transaction, travel bookings, corporate reimbursements, ATM withdrawals, invoice descriptions that read like the script of a scam performed badly. The Rome withdrawal matched charges for the influencer hotel and a string of boutique purchases. The hotel's invoice matched a corporate refund request in the company books. The accountant, calm as always, explained the discrepancies in plain English. "We're not talking about clerical errors. We're talking about systematic routing of company funds to personal expenses that were never legitimately business-related." Her voice was gentle but precise. That's what makes truth difficult to wiggle around. Mom's face was the first to fall. She opened and closed her mouth a few times like she was trying to find air. Dad's hands trembled on the arms of his chair. Aaron's bravado cracked into something raw and animal, equal parts fear and fury. When it came time for the disclosures, the forms were thin paper, but they had weight. They weren't the dramatic confessions I'd imagined when I was angry. They were lists of numbers and dates, small betrayals inked down in a bureaucratic hand. Then something happened that surprised me. Aunt Lisa stood and walked to the front. She'd always been the only adult in the room who treated me like I mattered. She held the microphone without theatrics. "This scholarship," she said, "is a brilliant idea. It's what Grandpa would have wanted. But if we're going to do this properly, we have to start with truth." She looked at my parents with a level calm that was more devastating than shouting. "You can make this right, or you can let the law do it. The choice is yours." There was silence, brutal and long, the kind that keeps your bones raw. Finally, Dad's voice, small, not the angry baritone I knew, but something like a child's plea. "Nolan, we didn't know how to do any other way. We thought we were keeping the family afloat." He flailed for words that could make history evaporate. "You thought it was okay to take what wasn't yours," I said. "Not because you were hungry, but because the idea of comfort mattered more than the truth." I didn't shout. I didn't need to. Those who are used to ruling with money know the taste of it in the mouth. They know how it feels to be taken off the throne. That disorientation was written all over them. Mr. Dean put the legal option on the table. The bank had already flagged enough to support civil claims. The pattern could be used for criminal referral if prosecutors wanted to pursue fraud. I'd consulted counsel in the quiet of my life for months. I knew consequences could be enforced. The room watched me, as if expecting a final flourish. I had two paths, and I wanted my choice to be moral, not petty. I wanted the family to get a chance to repair the harm. So I proposed what my grandfather would have accepted: repayment plans proportionate to what was taken, mandatory financial counseling for my parents and Aaron, and a restitution schedule formalized through the trust. A plan enforced by a neutral trustee, and with teeth if the terms weren't met. If they refused, I'd let the accounts reconcile through legal channels and pursue the civil remedies. If criminal charges were recommended by investigators, I would not obstruct them. Erin's lips trembled. "You can't do this," she said. "You're destroying us." She sounded young and frightened, as if the world had finally tipped on its axis and she'd been standing on the wrong side. I looked at her without pity. "You made choices," I said. "You used other people's money instead of your own. You took money that wasn't given to you for your rent and spent it on designer dresses in a hotel. You were given chances and you chose luxury over honesty. It was harsh, but honest. You can't go to war with a person and then be surprised when you need to account for your actions." The room felt like the hinge of a door slowly swinging. Mom started to cry then. Wet, racking sobs that had no melodrama to them. Just the sound of a woman realizing the house she'd built on small conveniences had cracked. Dad's shoulders slumped. Erin's face flushed the color of shame. In the days that followed, the fallout set in like a winter front. The bank's fraud team continued their investigation and ended up recommending civil action for the misappropriations. We filed a formal reconciliation claim to recover the amounts that had been taken. It was a process by which numbers got back where they belonged and records closed up like wounds. My parents were humbled in a way that looks ugly and necessary on the outside. They had to sell the Mercedes, the car my grandfathers had been so clear about, to help fund repayment. They signed on to financial management courses and started working with a counselor to untangle a lifetime of enabling patterns. Mom, who'd always used guilt like currency, learned to sit with discomfort instead of weaponizing it. The counselor made her write, with a steady hand, the list of times she'd chosen Aaron over fairness. She read that list to me one evening in a voice that wasn't theatrical, and apologizing finally looked like real work. Aaron was forced into the most uncomfortable place: accountability. The bank's report, the camera footage, the receipts, they cut off easy lies. She faced the possibility of criminal referral for the ATM withdrawal. In the end, prosecutors offered a deal: restitution and probation rather than prison time, conditional on full cooperation and entry into a financial rehabilitation program. She took it, partly because she was scared, partly because the alternative would have been a public legal battle she didn't want. She had to sell some of her things, go back to a job that paid less but was honest, and report regularly to a trustee about her progress. The Mercedes went to an auction and the funds were applied toward restitution. I watched her move through the motions with an adult seriousness that I hadn't seen before, and while a part of me wanted to gloat, a larger part wanted to see if she could learn. The neighborhood noticed. People I hadn't spoken to in years called to say they'd heard and were sorry, or, in some cases, were suddenly very interested in where the scholarship would direct its money. Gossip is a blunt instrument, and it cuts both ways. Some neighbors were defensive for my parents. Others slipped into the polite, curious distance that community gossip breeds. But the scholarship took on a life of its own. The first applicants arrived with essays and transcripts and letters of reference, and Aunt Lisa and I spent long evenings reading them. The first recipient was a kid from our town who worked nights at a hardware store and wanted to study civil engineering. He cried when he got the call. I cried too, but quietly and with a different feeling than I'd felt in months. This time my chest filled with something warm and clean. Money, as my grandfather knew, can be a tool for restoration, not just a lever of control. I used the company in ways that tightened oversight and redirected privilege to utility. We set clearer rules for company funds, instituted quarterly audits, and created a family financial policy that had legal punch behind it. No personal expenses without board sign-off, mandatory disclosure for any perceived conflicts, and zero tolerance for routing corporate funds for private indulgence. Those aren't small measures to people used to sliding invoices into their pockets. To me, they were the reasonable guardrails my grandfather would have insisted on. Emotionally, the house was quieter. The easy, performative love that had always wrapped around my family, where family will handle it, evaporated into a new vocabulary: repair, restitution, responsibility. It was messy. There were dinners where speech stuck in throats and apologies came out in stilted fits. There were moments of real connection. Aunt Lisa and I cooking a Sunday meal. Erin calling me late one night to say she'd finished her first budget plan without panicking. That last one felt like a small victory, the sort that doesn't merit a headline but changes the course of a life. People often ask if revenge feels sweet. My answer has always been complicated. There is a satisfaction in the righting of wrongs, yes, in seeing accountability finally applied where it had been asked for and ignored. But the sweetness is short-lived if it's only about triumph. What felt deeper, steady and strange, and almost sacred, was watching my grandfather's intentions unfold. He'd left me not just money, but a responsibility. He'd trusted me, in some small, fierce way, to fix a pattern that had been eating our family from the inside out. I took that responsibility seriously. I wanted the outcome to be fair, to be durable, and to teach rather than humiliate. Months later, at a small ceremony to announce the scholarship's first group of names, Mom stood beside me. Her eyes were red, but her voice was steady. "We owe him everything," she said, and for a heartbeat the old easy lies almost resurfaced. Then she looked at me and continued, "But we also owe you an apology that fits the harm. We're working on it." I wanted to tell her that apologies are deeds, not words. She knew that now. Erin, after the months of restitution payments and the mandatory counseling, showed up at one of the scholarship selection meetings. She volunteered to help with the community outreach. It was clumsy at first. She fumbled with the sign-up sheets and apologized too much, but she came back the next week and the next. People noticed small, consistent changes. They add up. Dad, who had been so quick to insist I apologize, called me one night when the house was empty. His voice had lost its old sonorous confidence. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "I was scared to take responsibility because I didn't want to seem small in front of my peers. I put pride in front of truth. That was wrong." The admission landed like a stone that finally found the bottom of a pond. We spoke for a long time about shame and fear and the distance those two emotions build between people. He didn't ask for things to go back to the way they were. He didn't try to buy forgiveness. He just said the sentence that had been missing for decades. Life, for me, reconstituted itself into a better version of what I'd had before. I continued to lead at work, but not as someone escaping personal chaos. I led as someone who had rebuilt order. I still invested in the company that was now my responsibility, but I also invested in my home, in my relationships that were honest rather than performative, and in quiet mornings when I could make coffee without feeling obligated to anyone. There were hard days, a tax question here, a legal form there. There were social ripples. People I'd thought would be allies were distant. Others I hadn't expected stepped forward. But the worst of it, the feeling of being that invisible glue, was gone. I didn't have to hold everything together for people who'd repeatedly sat back and assumed I would. On a warm evening in late October, Aunt Lisa and I walked by the river where, years before, my grandfather had let me sit in his workshop and taught me how to fix radios. We talked about the scholarship recipients and about how sometimes people have to be shown the consequences of their choices before they learn anything. She squeezed my hand and said, "He would have been proud. Not proud in the way your mother is proud when she brags at parties, but proud in the way men like him were proud," quietly, with a nod. I laughed. "That's the highest compliment," I said. As we turned back toward our cars, I thought about glue. For the longest time, I had thought glue was noble, that holding things together, even when they were falling apart, was the best thing to do. But real repair isn't about making things stick back together so they look whole. It's about replacing rotten wood, reinforcing the frame, and making sure the house stands on its own. You don't fix a broken floor by gluing the boards back on if the joists are rotten. You rebuild. That night, I sat down at my desk, opened the small, sealed envelope my grandfather had left me, and read it for the first time. He'd written, in his blunt, careful hand, that generosity without boundaries is a kindness that kills, that money can be a tool of freedom if wielded with responsibility, and a single sentence that made me smile and feel the kind of completion that isn't about vengeance, but about understanding. Fix what's broken, Nolan, but don't let fixing be your life. Build something that lasts. I folded the letter and placed it in the drawer next to the photographs of the trips I'd finally taken for myself. I thought of the scholarship kid with grease on his hands and certainty in his eyes, of Aunt Lisa's steady faith, of Aaron's slow, reluctant return to honesty. I thought of the house I'd bought, the plants I remembered to water, and Claire, who sat beside me some nights and read while I tinkered with business plans. Outside, somewhere in the neighborhood, someone laughed, small, human, not forced. I poured myself a glass of wine, stood at the window for a moment, and felt that strange, clean calm that comes after a storm when the air actually does smell different. I had been the glue for a long time. Now, I was the architect. The house wasn't perfect. The family wasn't whole. But the structure was honest. And for the first time in my life, when I thought about holding things together, I didn't picture glue. I pictured hands that knew when to build and when to walk away. I turned off the lamp and went to bed. And as the city settled into its quiet hum, I slept without the old ache of filling other people's holes. I slept with the knowledge that I'd done right, not for vengeance, but because someone had trusted me to. My name's Leo, I'm 34, and until very recently, I thought I was doing the right thing by taking care of my parents. For most of my adult life, I've been the dependable one, the successful child, the one with a steady job, a decent apartment, and enough discipline not to spiral into chaos every time life threw a curveball. Meanwhile, my younger sister Ashley bounced from boyfriend to boyfriend, job to job, and my parents, well, they coasted. They always had an excuse for why things were tight. Your father's hours got cut, or we had to loan money to your uncle again. And I, like the loyal fool I was, kept the lights on. Literally. I started helping when I was 25. First it was little things. Paying for mom's prescriptions, covering the overdue gas bill, helping with groceries when they were short this month. But over time, it became expected. The requests got bigger. I started paying the property taxes when Dad forgot, twice. Then took over the mortgage when he was between jobs, a period that stretched 3 years and counting. Eventually, I refinanced the house to keep them from losing it. My name went on the deed. It was supposed to be temporary, a technicality, but of course, nothing about this family was ever temporary unless it benefited them. I never complained. Not when I got off work late to Venmo them money so their power wouldn't be shut off. Not when I had to cancel a trip because they accidentally used my credit card again. And definitely not when they made sly comments at dinner like, well, at least we raised one responsible adult. Usually while shooting disappointed glances at Ashley, who was too busy updating her socials to notice. But something changed this year. For the first time in nearly a decade, I had saved enough and arranged enough time off to go on an actual vacation. Not just a weekend road trip, an actual week in Spain. I booked the flights, reserved a small flat near the beach, even planned an itinerary that included nothing but sleeping, walking, and pretending I didn't exist. After years of always saying, maybe next year, I was finally doing it. I was proud. I thought, stupidly, that my parents would be happy for me. They were not. 2 weeks before the trip, I went over for dinner and brought it up casually, saying, hey, so I was wondering if one of you might be able to watch Luna while I'm gone. Just for a week. Luna's my dog, sweet, quiet, well-behaved. Rescued her 2 years ago. She loves my parents and they love her, or so I thought. My mom didn't even look up from her phone. You mean, like stay here? Yeah, I said. Just for a week. I'll leave food, her schedule, everything. Dad chuckled. You want us to babysit your dog? I mean dog sit. Just feed her, let her out. You guys are retired. Mom finally looked up. Leo, we're not your employees. I laughed, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. I've been paying the mortgage on this place for 5 years, I said, keeping my voice calm. I figured watching Luna for a week isn't much to ask. That's different, Mom said, standing to clear the table. That's helping family. This is an errand. An errand, I repeated, stunned. You don't even have to leave the house. She's house-trained. She just sleeps and eats and cuddles. Leo, you're always trying to guilt-trip us, Dad added, like I was the problem. This is why Ashley doesn't like coming over anymore. Ashley, by the way, hadn't contributed a cent since she graduated from high school. She didn't believe in debt, which somehow translated to letting me shoulder theirs. But sure, blame my tone. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I just looked around the house. The hardwood floors I paid to have refinished, the new fridge I bought after the old one died, the porch swing I installed last summer because Mom said she missed simple evenings. And I said, calmly, okay. That was it. No rant, no sarcasm, just okay. Then I got up, kissed Luna on the head, and went home. That night, I opened the folder on my laptop labeled House Docs. Then I called the property manager I used to rent out my condo when I lived abroad for 6 months. We talked for an hour. I told him I needed someone to take over within 3 weeks, someone who could handle everything remotely. He was more than happy to help. Demand was high. I told him to find someone quiet, responsible, and I didn't want the tenants to deal with my parents directly. At all. Got it, he said. They'll be notified legally with the change of leaseholder. Make it airtight, I told him. I don't want them to talk their way out of anything. Next, I booked a kennel for Luna. It was pricey but worth it. She'd be safe and pampered while I was gone. I finalized all the travel details, packed my bags, and left quietly. 3 days later, I was lying on a sun-warmed beach in southern Spain, sipping a drink that tasted like vacation and freedom. For the first time in years, I could hear myself think. I read. I slept. I watched seagulls instead of spreadsheets. It was, in a word, perfect. Until my phone buzzed. The text was from Mom. It just said, "Why are there strangers on our lawn with a truck?" A second later, one from Dad. "Some guy says he's from a property agency. They're putting a sign up. WTH is going on." Then the call started. 10 in a row. I muted them all. Instead, I opened the property manager's email confirming that the new tenants would be moving in next month. A young couple relocating for work, excited to live somewhere peaceful and close to a good school district. The manager had already arranged for photos, lock changes, and utility transfers. Everything was moving forward. Legally, cleanly, permanently. My phone kept buzzing, louder now, more insistent. But I just leaned back into my lounge chair, letting the sun warm my face as I thought about all the times I'd told myself I owed them. All the times I'd let guilt be louder than self-respect. Maybe this time, they'd finally understand what earned loyalty looks like. But I knew them better than that. And just as I was about to turn my phone off entirely, another message popped up, this one not from either of them. It was from Ashley. All it said was, "Leo, what did you do?" I stared at Ashley's message for a long minute. I didn't reply. Instead, I turned my phone off completely, tossed it into my bag, and went for a swim. I stayed in the water until my fingers wrinkled and my chest ached from laughing too hard with a group of fellow travelers I'd just met. They were strangers, but somehow, in that moment, they felt more like family than the people whose house I'd been paying for half a decade. When I got back to the flat that evening, I powered my phone on again just to check in on Luna. The kennel had sent photos of her curled up peacefully on a fluffy blanket, her tail wagging, eyes soft. At least someone was enjoying the break. Then, curiosity got the better of me. I scrolled through the notifications. There were over 30 missed calls, 12 voicemails, multiple texts, some rambling, others short and frantic. But one thread stood out. A group text between my parents, Ashley, and me that I hadn't seen active in months. The last message in it had been from Mom on my birthday, 4 months ago. "Sorry we couldn't make it. Hope it was a good one." No gift, no call, not even a card. Just an afterthought. But now it was flooded. Ashley, Leo, this isn't funny. You're overreacting. Just call the guy and tell him it was a mistake. Mom, you didn't even give us warning. What kind of son does this? Dad, you're acting like some kind of corporate landlord. We're your parents, not tenants. Ashley again, you owe them more respect than this. After everything they've done for you. I actually laughed out loud at that one. Respect? Respect is earned, not something you weaponize when the free ride gets cut off. Then came the final message from Mom. This isn't how family treats each other. That one made me pause. Not because it hurt. Not anymore. But because it was so deeply ironic that I actually whispered, wow, to the empty room. This isn't how family treats each other? Was family sticking your kid with the mortgage while pretending you were doing them a favor? Was it refusing one small act of help after years of financial support, then playing victim when the consequences finally arrived? Was it expecting endless sacrifices from one child while making excuses for another? No, this wasn't how family treated each other, but it was how consequences worked. The next morning, I met with my property manager via video call. He was efficient, professional, and mildly entertained when I explained who the current residents were. He walked me through the official notice that had already been mailed to the house, along with a digital copy for my records. Technically, he said, they have 30 days to vacate. But if they respond to the letter and agree to the move-out terms, we can make it easier for everyone. I asked if there had been any drama on the ground. He smirked. One of the neighbors said your dad was out front yelling about squatters' rights. Of course he was. I thanked him and hung up, just in time for another email to ping through. This one from my attorney. I'd asked her, just before the trip, to draft a letter outlining a formal end to my financial support. No more bills paid. No more mortgage coverage. And, most importantly, no more access to my accounts. I hadn't told my parents yet. I figured I'd save that for a face-to-face. Or rather, face-to-glare. And that moment arrived faster than expected. 2 days later, I landed back home. Jet-lagged, tanned, and somehow 10 pounds lighter from shedding years of resentment, I pulled into my driveway, my actual home, not the one they'd leached from, and found someone already waiting on my porch. Ashley. She was pacing like a tiger in a cage, arms crossed, phone in one hand. The moment she saw me, she launched in. You seriously need help. I raised a brow, dragging my suitcase up the stairs. Nice to see you too. They're freaking out, Leo. You couldn't have talked to them first. I did, I said calmly. You just weren't listening. This is insane. You can't just evict your own parents. I unlocked the door and held it open. They're welcome to find another place. Same as anyone else. She followed me inside, still ranting, but I stopped her with one sentence. They chose this. Ashley blinked. What? I set my keys down, looked her in the eye, and said it again. They chose this. Every time they took from me without thanks. Every time they laughed off my boundaries. Every time they acted like I owed them my life for being born. You're being cruel, she whispered. I leaned back against the counter. No, I'm being done. She stared at me for a long time. And for once, maybe the first time in years, she had no snappy comeback. Then, quietly, Mom said you changed. I smiled. Yeah, I finally did. That night, I didn't answer any more calls. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine, pulled Luna into my lap, and sat by the window, watching the sun dip behind the skyline. It was peaceful, but I knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. Because 3 days later, I received a certified letter from my parents' attorney. And what was inside? Well, that's when things got really interesting. The envelope sat on my kitchen table for 2 hours before I opened it. Not because I was nervous, though, to be honest, my stomach was doing the occasional somersault, but because I wanted to be calm, measured, collected. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me panic, even if they couldn't see me. It came in a thick ivory envelope with my full name typed in bold font. Return address? A local family law firm I'd heard of, but never dealt with. I made a mental note. So, they didn't use my lawyer. Interesting. I sliced the envelope open with a butter knife and pulled out a neat stack of legal documents. At the top, request for family mediation and emergency relief. I almost laughed. There was no lawsuit, no threats, no formal eviction challenge. It wasn't even a cease and desist. It was a plea dressed up in legalese. They wanted mediation, an official sit-down with lawyers present to discuss what they called a breakdown in familial cooperation and financial understanding. They claimed the house transfer had been coerced, that they were misled into signing over the deed during a time of financial distress, and that they were now facing homelessness due to miscommunication. But the best part, the part that had me actually setting the papers down to process what I was reading, was a request at the bottom of the letter. A proposed agreement. They wanted me to revert the deed back into their name. Resume financial responsibility for the property until they could stabilize. Agree not to rent, sell, or lease the home without mutual consent. Provide a formal apology in writing. Yes, you read that right. They wanted me to apologize. After nearly a decade of carrying them, of funding their lifestyle, of being treated like a bottomless ATM with zero emotional return, they wanted me to say sorry. The sheer audacity was almost impressive. Almost. I took a deep breath, walked over to my bookshelf, and pulled out the folder containing every receipt, statement, and bank transaction linked to that house. I had it all. Mortgage payments, repair bills, utility transfers, the notarized deed, even screenshots of the texts where Dad had practically begged me to take over the house, claiming it would only be until they got back on their feet. I hadn't planned to go to war with my family, but if they wanted to play this out in front of attorneys, I would meet them in the arena, and I wouldn't come unarmed. I forwarded the entire document package to my lawyer, Lydia, with a single sentence. Looks like the circus is coming to town. She called me 10 minutes later, laughing. I thought you were joking. Dead serious. You know they don't have a case, right? You've got more than enough documentation to prove ownership and responsibility. I know, I said, but they're not doing this to win. They're doing it to pressure me, to make it public, to shame me into backing down. Well, she said, her tone turning sharp, that's not going to happen. The mediation was scheduled for the following Wednesday. I showed up in a fitted navy suit. Not flashy, just competent, capable. Everything they always claimed I wasn't emotional enough to be. Lydia met me in the lobby of the law office downtown and handed me a copy of the binder she'd prepped. It had labeled tabs, color-coded evidence, and an entire section simply titled Entitlements and Transfers, 2017 to 2025. I glanced at her. You really did all this in 3 days? She smirked. I don't like bullies, especially ones who raise their victims. We walked into the conference room together, and there they were. Mom in her usual pastel cardigan, clutching a tissue dramatically like we were filming a daytime soap. Dad in his faded collared shirt, already red in the face. Ashley sat behind them, arms crossed, looking annoyed to even be present. They didn't greet me. Neither did their lawyer, a middle-aged man with thick glasses and a tired look in his eyes, like he already regretted taking the case. The meeting started off civil. The mediator, a woman named Beth, tried to set a tone of cooperation. But 10 minutes in, Mom started tearing up. We just don't understand why he would do this to his own parents. I asked you to watch my dog, I said flatly. That was the one favor I needed. After 10 years. That's not the point, Dad cut in. You could have talked to us. You blindsided us like we were strangers. You are strangers, I said, voice calm but firm. Strangers don't get to spend 10 years draining someone and still act surprised when the well runs dry. Ashley scoffed. So this is revenge. Lydia cut in smoothly. This is legal clarity. My client owns the property, has proof of every payment made, and is well within his rights to lease the house. The notice was filed legally. The tenants are moving in next week. This meeting is not a negotiation. Their lawyer tried to argue coercion again, that they didn't understand what they were signing years ago. But I had a signed document from their own notary, stating it was voluntary. It was like watching a house of cards fall in slow motion. And then, Mom did something I wasn't expecting. She stood up, quietly, pulled something from her purse. A photo. A little framed picture of me as a kid, sitting on Dad's shoulders, all sunburnt cheeks and missing teeth. She placed it on the table like it was evidence. That little boy used to love his family. I looked at the picture, then at her. That little boy, I said, grew up. And he realized love is a two-way street. The silence in the room was so complete, I could hear the wall clock ticking. Beth cleared her throat. Unless there are new facts to be presented, I believe this concludes the session. Mom didn't cry this time. She just stared at me, as if waiting for me to crack, to change my mind, to be the son they imagined I was, the quiet little boy who said yes every time they asked, no matter how much it cost. But I didn't. I stood, packed my folder, and walked out. But as Lydia and I stepped into the elevator, I glanced over and noticed Ashley still sitting at the table. She was staring at the photo, and for the first time, I saw something in her face that surprised me. Not anger, not annoyance, guilt. And that's when I realized, maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the only one who had finally grown up. The following weekend, I drove out to the house. It felt strange, pulling into the driveway like I was visiting someone else's home. The lawn was overgrown, patches of crabgrass choking what had once been Mom's prized flower beds. The porch swing I'd installed now hung lopsided, one of the chains barely clinging to its bolt. It was like the house had decided to match the people living inside, neglected, entitled, and slowly falling apart. I parked and stepped out. The moving truck was already there, engine idling at the curb. A pair of movers leaned against the side, sipping coffee and checking their phones. One of them nodded to me. "You're Leo?" I nodded. "All right. They've been stalling. Told us to wait until you arrived." I sighed. Of course they did. I walked up the front steps and knocked. There was no answer at first, just muffled voices behind the door. Then it swung open. Ashley stood there. No makeup, hair in a messy bun, dark circles under her eyes. "You actually came," she said, folding her arms. "Someone has to sign the papers." She stepped aside, and I entered. The house looked smaller somehow. The light seemed dimmer, the furniture older. Without the illusion of control and guilt holding it all together, it was just a worn-out space filled with people who had stayed too long and tried too little. Dad was sitting in his recliner, arms crossed, eyes locked on the TV, even though it was turned off. Mom stood nearby, her back to me, clutching a small porcelain angel she used to keep on the mantel. It had a chipped wing. Nobody spoke at first. Finally, I cleared my throat and said, "The movers are ready. Lease agreement goes into effect tomorrow. I gave you 5 extra days." "You're welcome." Mom turned, eyes glassy but dry. "You really hate us that much?" I stared at her. "No. If I hated you, I would have sold this place to a developer and let them bulldoze it." "Then why?" she asked, voice quiet now. "Why are you doing this?" I took a deep breath. "Because you taught me that family means sacrifice. And I believed that. For years, I gave everything I had to support this household. I skipped vacations, pushed off relationships, ignored my own burnout, all because I thought it was what a good son does." I looked at Dad. "But when I finally asked for one simple thing, you laughed in my face. Like I was some spoiled child asking for candy instead of the man who paid your mortgage and your medical bills." Dad looked away. I turned back to Mom. "And when I drew a boundary, you didn't apologize. You didn't ask to talk. You tried to sue me." Her lips trembled, but she said nothing. I nodded toward the hallway. "You've had time to pack. If you need the movers to help, they're outside." Ashley spoke up then, stepping into the living room. "You know they won't make it on their own, right? They don't have jobs, Leo. No savings. They were counting on you forever." I looked at her. "I know. Then what happens next?" "They figure it out." "That's cold." "No," I said. "That's adulthood." She looked like she wanted to argue, but then her eyes dropped. She sighed. I tried to get them to listen. After the mediation, told them to apologize, to be honest. But you know how they are. "I do. They're not going to change. Then they'll learn the hard way." There was a long pause. Then Ashley said, "I found a place. Tiny 1-bedroom. I'm moving out today too." I raised an eyebrow. "Didn't think you'd go through with it." She shrugged. "Figured it was time. I've been coasting off them same as they've been coasting off you. And I'm tired of it." A beat passed. "You know," she added, "I always thought you were just the serious one. The boring sibling. But you were just carrying the weight." I gave a half smile. Better late than never. The movers entered then, and the house came alive with motion. Boxes thumped onto the floor. Furniture scraped against the walls. Years of clutter and entitlement were finally being cleared out. As the couch was lifted through the door, Mom looked at me and said, "Where are we even supposed to go?" I didn't flinch. "You'll figure it out." Like I had to. That was the last thing I said to her. 3 hours later, the truck pulled away, carrying their belongings to whatever temporary place Ashley had managed to arrange for them. She told me it wasn't glamorous, a short-term rental outside town. But it had walls, heat, and just enough space for 2 people who needed to learn how to live within their means. As for the house, I stood alone in it for a while after they left. It was oddly quiet, peaceful, like it had finally exhaled after years of holding its breath. The next day, The new tenants arrived. A young couple in their early 30s, both teachers, pregnant with their first child. When I handed them the keys, the woman smiled and said, "We'll take good care of it." I believed her. I drove home afterward, to my real home, the one with Luna curled on the couch in silence that didn't feel heavy. I poured myself a drink, sat by the window, and opened a letter Ashley had slipped into my hand as she left. It read, "Leo, I know I don't deserve your trust or your forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that watching you stand up for yourself made me realize how much I've been hiding from my own life. You didn't destroy the family. You just stopped letting it destroy you. Thank you for that." Hey, I folded the letter and slid it into the back of my bookshelf, next to the deed. Not as evidence, but as closure. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the backup plan. I wasn't the fixer. I wasn't the safety net. I was just a man who'd finally reclaimed his peace. And this time, I wasn't giving it back. I never thought I'd see the day my own father would look me dead in the eyes and tell me to do the right thing. Not because I'd done something wrong, but because I refused to hand over the house I worked years to afford. My name's Nolan. I'm 31, and I've always been the quiet one in my family. Not weak, just the one who didn't want to stir the pot. My sister, Leah, was the opposite. She was the storm. Loud, reckless, and somehow always painted as misunderstood. She could crash Dad's car, miss rent, or date the worst kind of people, and the family would still rush to comfort her like she was the victim of her own choices. Meanwhile, I could land a promotion or pay off a loan, and it'd barely get a nod. "That's what you're supposed to do," Dad would say. That was his way of keeping me humble, I guess. Growing up, Leah was always the golden child. She had this way of making every problem sound like someone else's fault, and Dad fell for it every single time. I used to think it was because she reminded him of Mom. Carefree, spontaneous, full of fire, before Mom passed when we were teenagers. But as I got older, I realized it wasn't that deep. Dad just liked being needed, and Leah made sure he felt that way. I didn't. I learned early on to handle things myself. By the time I was 18, I was already working 2 part-time jobs and saving every penny. Leah, meanwhile, was finding herself, which meant blowing through her allowance and calling home for help every week. When I bought my first home at 29, I didn't even tell my family right away. It was a modest 3-bedroom place, nothing fancy, but it was mine. I'd worked for years to get there, skipping nights out, working overtime, and driving an old car that sounded like a dying lawnmower. When I finally signed the papers, it felt like breathing for the first time. Freedom, stability, my own space. I should have known it wouldn't stay that way for long, because nothing I owned ever stayed mine once Leah found out about it. It started small. I'd post a photo of my backyard garden or the kitchen remodel online, and she'd comment things like, "So proud of my brother living the dream." It looked supportive, but she always followed it up with, "Guess I'll move in soon, huh?" I'd laugh it off, but the more she said it, the less like a joke it felt, especially when Dad started echoing her. One night over dinner, he casually said, "You've got 3 bedrooms, right? Seems like a waste for just one person." I knew where that was going, so I brushed it off. "I like my space," I said. But that wasn't the end of it. Dad had this way of planting an idea and watering it until it sprouted into an obligation. Leah's fresh start talk began about 6 months later. She'd just gone through another breakup, this time with some guy she'd met online and moved in with after 3 weeks. It ended how you'd expect. He kicked her out, kept the furniture she'd bought on credit, and left her broke. She called Dad crying, saying she had nowhere to go. I didn't even know about it until he showed up at my house one Sunday morning without calling first. I was halfway through mowing the lawn when his car pulled into the driveway. He stepped out, hands in his jacket pockets, that look of fatherly concern that always meant he wanted something. "Nolan," he started, his voice softer than usual. "We need to talk about Leah." I killed the mower and wiped the sweat from my forehead, already feeling the tension build. "What about her?" I asked. He sighed like I was being difficult. "She's not in a good place right now. You know how hard she's had it. I just think she needs a fresh start. Somewhere quiet. Somewhere safe." I leaned against the mower handle. "And you're suggesting, what exactly?" He hesitated, but not long enough. "Well, you've got the space. Maybe she could stay here, just until she gets back on her feet." I laughed before I could stop myself. "Dad, she's 30. She's been getting back on her feet since high school." His expression hardened immediately. "That's not fair. She's been through a lot. We all have, I said quietly. He didn't like that answer. I'm not asking you to adopt her, Nolan. I'm asking you to do the right thing as her brother. That line hit me the wrong way. The right thing. I'd done the right thing my entire life. Studying, working, saving, helping out when Leah couldn't pay her phone bill. Every time I said yes, it only bought me a few weeks of peace before the next favor came around. I told him I'd think about it, which was my polite way of saying no. He didn't push further that day, but I knew it wasn't over. When Dad wanted something, he'd keep circling back until you gave in. Sure enough, a few days later, Leah called me. Hey, big bro, how's my favorite homeowner? Her voice was sweet, practiced. I could almost hear Dad in the background coaching her. What's up, Leah? I asked. So, she began, dragging the word out like she was easing into something big. Dad told me you might have some extra space. I've been looking for a new place, but the rental prices are insane right now. Maybe I could crash with you for a while. I kept my tone even. Leah, I like my privacy. I've worked hard to have my own space. There was a pause. Then, she sighed dramatically. Wow, I didn't expect that from you. I mean, after everything I've been through, I bit my tongue, because the last time she said that, it ended with me co-signing a loan she never paid back. I'm sorry, I said, but it's not a good time. She got quiet, then said coldly, you know, Dad always said you only care about yourself. And that was that, the guilt trip. I hung up before it could go any further. I tried to shake it off, but a pit formed in my stomach. I knew she'd go running to Dad, twisting the story until I looked like the villain. And I was right. 2 days later, I got another surprise visit. This time, Dad didn't bother pretending to be calm. He stormed into my house without even waiting for me to invite him in. Unbelievable, he said, pacing the living room. Your sister's in tears, and you're sitting here acting like some kind of landlord. I stood there, frozen, watching him unravel. She's not homeless, I said. She has options. She's your sister, he barked. Family helps family. I felt something snap inside me. Funny, I said, because family never helped me. That stopped him for a second. His jaw tightened. That's different. You never needed help. Because I worked for everything, I shot back. While enough, he snapped. You're being selfish. If your mother were here, she'd agree with me. I interrupted. His face went pale. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then he spoke, quieter but sharper. You know what? I'm disappointed in you. I thought I raised you better than this. He left after that, slamming the door so hard the picture frames rattled. I stood there for a long time, staring at the empty space where he'd stood, wondering how it always came to this. Leah in trouble, Dad furious at me for not fixing it. I didn't hear from either of them for almost a week. Then came the text that made my blood boil. We've decided Leah's moving in. It's the right thing to do. Be reasonable. We've decided. Like I didn't even exist in the equation. That was the first moment I felt something shift, a quiet anger that burned low but steady. I wasn't just the afterthought anymore. I was the obstacle. And something told me that if I didn't draw the line now, I'd lose everything I'd built. What I didn't know yet was that Leah wasn't just freeloading anymore. She'd crossed a line even Dad couldn't ignore, and soon, I'd have the proof in my hands. Proof that would make him question everything he thought he knew about his golden child. I didn't reply to Dad's text. I wanted to. I typed out at least half a dozen versions, some calm, some angry, some sarcastic, but nothing felt right. I deleted them all and went quiet instead. I figured if I ignored it long enough, he'd cool off. But that wasn't how things worked in my family. When Leah wanted something, silence wasn't an obstacle. It was an invitation for her to push harder. A few days later, I came home from work and saw her car parked in my driveway. A beat-up silver hatchback I recognized immediately, stuffed with boxes and clothes spilling out from the back seat. My heart sank. I didn't even make it out of the car before she stepped onto the porch with that practiced, innocent smile, waving like she was greeting an old friend instead of an unwanted roommate. Surprise, she said, like this was some kind of joke. I got out slowly, trying to stay calm. What are you doing here? She tilted her head. Dad said you agreed I could stay. Didn't he tell you? I clenched my jaw. No, he didn't. And I didn't agree to anything. Her expression changed instantly. Wow, she said, voice dripping with mock hurt. I didn't realize you were going to make this difficult. I thought we were family. I wanted to tell her to pack up and leave. Every bone in my body was telling me to. But then she started crying, loud, performative sobs like something out of a soap opera. "I have nowhere to go," she said, sniffling dramatically. "Everything I owned is in my car. Please, Nolan, just a week or two. I'll be gone before you know it." It would have been easier if I didn't see the neighbors watching from across the street. It looked bad, a grown man refusing to let his crying sister inside. So I sighed, rubbed the back of my neck, and said, "Fine. A week. That's it." She wiped her tears immediately. "You're the best," she said, already walking inside without waiting for me. That's how it started, the slow, painful unraveling of my peace. At first, she acted grateful. She'd make breakfast, clean the kitchen, laugh at my jokes. But it didn't last. Within a few days, she started forgetting to do her dishes. Then her stuff began creeping out of the guest room. Makeup on the bathroom counter, shoes by the front door, clothes draped over the couch. She started treating my home like a hotel she didn't have to pay for. And then came the guests. I came home one Friday night after a long shift to find 3 of her friends in the living room drinking wine and blasting music. My living room. My speakers. I froze at the door. One of them, a guy in a hoodie, waved a bottle at me. "Hey man, you must be Leah's brother." Leah looked up, smiling like nothing was wrong. "You're home early," she said, as if I was the intruder. "Leah, what is this?" I asked, trying to keep my voice level. "Just a small get-together," she said. "You said you'd be home late. I didn't say you could invite people over." She rolled her eyes. "Don't be so uptight. It's my first weekend off in forever." I glanced at the half-empty bottles on the coffee table and the cigarette smoke wafting from the open window. "I want them out," I said quietly. Her friends went silent. Leah stared at me like she couldn't believe I was serious. "You're unbelievable," she said finally. "You can't stand to see me happy, can you? Leah, this is my house." She stood up and crossed her arms. "Yeah, well, maybe you should try being less of a control freak." I didn't yell. I didn't argue. I just walked over, picked up one of the wine glasses, and set it down on the counter. "Everyone out. Now." She glared at me, but eventually, they left, muttering under their breath as they went. The door shut behind them, and for a moment there was silence. Then Leah exploded. "You ruined my night. Do you know how embarrassing that was? You treat me like some kind of child." I turned to her, tired and angry. "If you acted like an adult, I wouldn't have to." That was the night she stopped pretending to be grateful. After that, it became a war of small battles. She'd forget to pay for groceries. She'd blast music late at night. She even borrowed my car once without asking. I found out when I noticed the fuel tank nearly empty. Every time I confronted her, she'd twist it around. "You're overreacting," she'd say. "It's just a car." Or, "Relax, it's just music." And every time she got caught, she'd call Dad. It was like clockwork. Within an hour, I'd get a call or text. "She's your sister. Stop being so harsh on her." Or, "You've always been too strict, Nolan. She's trying her best." Her best. That phrase started to make my skin crawl. 2 weeks turned into a month. Then 2. Every time I brought up the deadline, Leah found a new excuse. "I'm waiting to hear back about a job. I just need to save for a deposit. It's only a few more weeks." Then one evening, she dropped the mask entirely. I came home and found her sitting at the kitchen table with Dad. They were having coffee, in my kitchen, and from the way they both looked at me, I knew this wasn't a friendly visit. "Nolan," Dad began, his tone stiff but calm. "We need to talk." I stayed standing. "If this is about Leah moving out, it's about Leah staying," he interrupted. I blinked. "Excuse me. She's been through a lot. You've got the space. It's not fair to push her out when she's trying to get her life together." I laughed, genuinely stunned. "Dad, I gave her 2 months. 2. She's not even looking for a job. She sleeps until noon and throws parties." Leah frowned. "That's not true. I've been helping around the house." "Helping?" I snapped. "You use my car, my food, my electricity. Stop." Dad barked, standing now. "I'm not going to sit here and listen to you talk to your sister like that." I stared at him. "You're defending her again. You always do." "She deserves a fresh start," he said firmly. "She's had bad luck. You should be proud to help family." "Proud?" I asked quietly. "You want me to be proud that she's freeloading off me?" "Watch your tone," he warned. Something inside me broke then. I'd spent years biting my tongue, avoiding conflict, trying to earn approval that never came. And here he was, in my house, telling me I owed more to someone who had never lifted a finger for anyone but herself. "Dad," I said slowly, "if you think she deserves this house more than I do, then maybe you should buy her one." He stared at me for a long moment. Then his voice dropped low. "You don't talk to me like that. Not after everything I've done for you." I felt my pulse pounding. "What exactly have you done for me, Dad? You bailed her out 100 times, but you never once helped me when I was struggling." He didn't respond. He just grabbed his jacket, muttered something under his breath, and stormed out. Leah followed, glaring at me on her way out. That night, I sat in silence for a long time. I thought maybe that was it. Maybe they'd both stay away for a while. But I underestimated how deep their bond ran. The next morning, my front door was unlocked. My stomach dropped as I realized someone had been inside. I walked in to find boxes stacked in the hallway again, Leah's things. All of them. She was moving back in. And taped to the fridge was a note in Dad's handwriting. "Do the right thing." I don't know how long I stood there staring at that note, but something inside me went cold. They weren't just asking anymore. They were taking. From that point on, Leah treated the house like it was hers. She rearranged furniture, threw out my food because she didn't like the smell, even started getting mail delivered to my address. I told her to stop, but she just smiled and said, "Relax, you're being paranoid." One afternoon, while she was out, I went through the kitchen drawers to find some receipts for my renovation expenses. Instead, I found something that made my blood run cold. A stack of unopened letters from Dad's bank, addressed to him but delivered here. She must have been having his mail redirected. I opened one out of curiosity and froze. It was a notice about unauthorized transfers. Large sums, hundreds, sometimes thousands, being pulled from his account. My first thought was that he was being scammed. But then I saw the signature on one of the authorization forms. Leah's. I stared at it for a long time, the reality settling like ice in my stomach. She wasn't just mooching off me, she was stealing from him. And when I realized that he'd been threatening to disown me for not giving her my house, while she'd been draining his bank account behind his back, that's when I knew things were about to explode. Because for the first time in my life, I had proof, real, undeniable proof, that his golden child wasn't who he thought she was. And the next move I made would change everything for our family forever. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat at my kitchen table with those bank letters spread out in front of me, reading them over and over until the words started blurring together. Every transaction, every forged signature, it all spelled out the truth I'd known deep down for years but had never been able to prove. Leah wasn't just entitled. She was dangerous. The first withdrawal was small, $150 here, $200 there, but then the amounts started climbing. $500, $1,200, $2,000, all pulled over the course of a few months, all authorized under Dad's name. I couldn't believe it at first. Maybe there was some mistake? Maybe he'd given her permission and just forgotten to tell me? But then I saw the note scrawled on one of the envelopes. "Don't tell Dad. I'll fix it later." It was in Leah's handwriting. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. My sister, the one Dad had defended with every ounce of his pride, was stealing from him. And he had no idea. I thought about calling him right away. My hand even hovered over my phone. But then I stopped. Because I knew how that conversation would go. He wouldn't believe me. He'd tell me I was misinterpreting things, that I was trying to turn him against her. He'd protect her before he even saw the evidence. That was just how it had always been. So I waited. I started collecting everything. Every bank letter, every email notification, even the small sticky notes she left lying around that hinted at what she was doing. I made copies, photographed them, put them in a folder labeled House Repairs, and tucked it away in my office drawer. Meanwhile, Leah carried on like nothing had happened. She sang in the kitchen, blasted music while getting ready, and posted filtered selfies in my living room with captions like, "New chapter, new me." It was surreal, like watching a storm build while everyone around you insists it's just a breeze. Dad kept calling too. His tone had softened since our last fight, but the guilt tripping hadn't stopped. "Son," he said one evening over the phone, "I know things have been tense, but you need to let go of this resentment. Leah's trying." "Is she?" I asked quietly. "Yes," he said. "She told me she's been helping you out around the house, cleaning, cooking." I almost laughed. "Dad, she doesn't even wash her own dishes." There was a pause. "You've always been hard on her, Nolan. You need to learn forgiveness." I clenched my jaw. Forgiveness and stupidity aren't the same thing. He sighed. One day you'll understand what family really means. When he hung up, I sat there staring at my phone, feeling something shift inside me. I'd spent my whole life trying to earn that man's approval. I'd bent over backward, kept quiet, played the good son. But at that moment, I realized it didn't matter how good I was. He'd always see what he wanted to see. And what he wanted was his perfect daughter, even if she was burning the family down behind his back. That was the moment I stopped trying to win him over. The next few weeks were quiet, but tense. Leah was getting bolder. She started intercepting the mail before I got home. She even asked once, casually, "Hey, do you check your own mail every day? You know, for security and stuff." The way she said it made my skin crawl. I played dumb and shrugged. Nah, never anything important. But I started checking my mailbox every morning before work instead of after. That's how I found the final piece of proof. A letter from the bank stating that a joint savings account had been opened in Dad's name and another signer, Leah M. Carter. My heart sank as I read it. She wasn't just taking money. She'd built an entire system to funnel it. That night, I made a copy of the letter, tucked it into my growing evidence folder, and decided it was time to do something I should have done a long time ago. Take back control of my own life. The first step was getting Leah out. I stopped cooking for her, stopped cleaning up her messes. When she asked where her favorite snacks were, I said, "You live here. Go buy them." I started locking my office door. She noticed quickly. "What's with the sudden boundaries?" she said one afternoon, smirking as she leaned against my doorframe. "Afraid I'll steal your precious pencils?" "No," I said evenly. "I just value my privacy." Her smirk faltered for a split second before she shrugged. "You're being weird lately." "Maybe," I said, "but I'm still paying the bills." She rolled her eyes and walked off, muttering something under her breath. But she knew something had changed. The leash she'd been yanking for years wasn't tightening anymore. Around that time, I started putting more energy into work. I'm a systems analyst for a small firm, not glamorous, but steady. I'd always done my job well, but now I started pushing harder, volunteering for extra projects, staying late, not because I needed to, but because it gave me a sense of purpose that home didn't. Within a couple of months, my boss noticed. I got a raise, small but meaningful. For the first time in a long while, I felt like my effort actually mattered somewhere. At home, though, things were falling apart fast. Leah's behavior turned spiteful. She accidentally left the freezer door open, ruining all my groceries. She used my Netflix account to rent movies on my credit card. Once, she even unplugged my Wi-Fi router while I was in a meeting because the signal was better in the living room. Every time she pulled something new, I reminded myself, just hold out a little longer. Because I had a plan forming in the back of my mind, a way to expose her without giving her any warning. But before I could act, things took a sharp turn. One Friday night, Dad called, his voice unsteady. "Nolan," he said, "I just checked my account. There's money missing. Thousands." I kept my tone neutral. "Missing? Yes. I don't understand it. The bank says I must have approved some transfers, but I didn't. They even showed me a signature, and it looks," he paused. "It looks like Leah's." My stomach tightened. "Dad, listen," he cut me off. "No, I don't want to believe it. She wouldn't do that. There must be some mistake." I hesitated, then said quietly, "Come by tomorrow. I have something you need to see." When I hung up, I exhaled for what felt like the first time in weeks. The storm was coming, but this time, I wasn't afraid. That night, Leah came home late. She was humming, tossing her purse on the counter, scrolling through her phone. "You're up late," she said. "So are you." She looked at me, then laughed lightly. "Okay, weird vibe. Did I forget to do the dishes again?" I stared at her for a moment, the weight of everything pressing against my chest. "You might want to get some sleep," I said. "Dad's coming over tomorrow." Her smile faltered. "What for?" I didn't answer. The next morning, Dad showed up early. Leah wasn't even awake yet. He came in looking pale and tired. The same man who'd once lectured me about respect, now clutching his coffee like it was keeping him upright. "Nolan," he said quietly, "tell me what's going on." I led him to the kitchen table where I'd laid out every piece of evidence in neat rows. Letters, copies, screenshots. He stared at them, his eyes moving slowly over each page. I watched his expression shift from confusion to disbelief to something darker. Grief, maybe. "This can't be right," he murmured. "She wouldn't." "Look at the signatures," I said gently. They're all her handwriting. He sank into a chair. For the first time, he looked small, vulnerable, like a man realizing the foundation he'd built his life on was starting to crumble. Before either of us could say more, Leah walked in wearing pajamas, rubbing her eyes. "What's all this?" she asked, her voice groggy but cautious. Dad looked up at her, eyes filled with something I'd never seen before. Anger, yes, but also heartbreak. "Leah," he said softly, "sit down." She froze, glancing between us. "Why? What's going on?" "Now," he said, his tone sharp. The air in the room turned electric. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. Leah sat slowly, eyes darting toward the papers spread across the table. When she saw her own handwriting staring back at her, she went pale. "Dad, I can explain," she started, but her voice cracked. He slammed his hand on the table. "Explain what? How you've been stealing from me?" "I wasn't stealing," she shouted. "You said I could use the money. I said you could borrow a little, not drain my account." Her face twisted into something cold. "You've always given everything to him," she yelled, pointing at me. "I just wanted what's fair." And just like that, the entire house came crashing down around us. Years of resentment, favoritism, and denial, all spilling out into the open. But here's the strange part. Even as they screamed, even as the family I'd known fell apart in front of me, I felt calm. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't backing down. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the quiet one sitting in the corner, taking the blame. I was standing in the wreckage, watching it burn, and realizing I was finally free. That was the day everything changed. Dad didn't speak to me for a week after that. He was processing, I guess. Leah packed her things that night, slamming doors and muttering curses, but I didn't stop her. When the door shut behind her for the last time, the silence that followed wasn't empty. It was peaceful. For the first time in years, I could hear myself think. The days that followed were strange. I expected to feel guilty, maybe even lonely. But I didn't. I felt lighter. I started going for walks after work, listening to music I liked, cooking actual meals instead of microwaving leftovers. My house started to feel like home again. Dad still didn't call, but I didn't chase him. I focused on rebuilding, emotionally, financially, even socially. I caught up with friends I hadn't seen in ages, poured energy into my job, and started setting real boundaries for the first time in my life. It wasn't easy. There were nights I still replayed everything in my head, wondering if I could have done something differently. But every time I passed Leah's empty room, I reminded myself I'd done what needed to be done. I thought the worst was behind me. But a month later, I got a call from Dad. His voice was tight, brittle. "Nolan," he said, "we need to talk. It's about Leah." And from the tone in his voice, I knew something was coming. Something that would drag all of us back into the storm I thought I'd finally escaped. When Dad called that day, his voice didn't sound like the man who'd once barked orders across the dinner table or lectured me about family loyalty. It was fragile, cracked in a way that told me he'd spent the last few nights awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment he'd defended Leah over me. "Nolan," he said quietly, "we need to talk. It's about your sister." Those 5 words hit me like a stone. I didn't ask for details. I just told him to come by. When we hung up, I sat there staring at my reflection in the blank TV screen, realizing I wasn't afraid anymore. For the first time in years, I held the upper hand, not out of manipulation or guilt, but out of truth. Cold, undeniable truth. When he arrived later that afternoon, he looked 10 years older than he had a month ago. His posture slumped, his eyes dull, his usual confidence gone. "She drained more accounts," he said as soon as he stepped inside. "She used my card again, after everything." I didn't say, "I told you so." I just handed him a cup of coffee and let him talk. "She's asking for help again," he muttered bitterly. "Says she's sorry. Says she'll pay it back once she gets on her feet." "But Nolan," he looked up at me with that hollow expression I'd never seen on him before. "She's not getting back on her feet this time, is she?" "No," I said quietly. "She's not." He nodded slowly, like the truth finally weighed enough to crush denial. And for the first time in my life, he apologized. "I should have listened to you sooner." It wasn't much, but it was something. A small crack in the armor of the man who'd never admitted fault. I thought maybe, just maybe, things would finally start healing. But that wasn't how my family worked. Because the thing about people like Leah, they don't disappear quietly. She called him later that evening while he was still at my house. I could hear her voice through his phone speaker, soft and desperate. Dad, please. I messed up, okay? I just need some time. Please don't shut me out. He didn't answer at first. His jaw tightened, his eyes closed. Then he said, "You stole from me, Leah." "It wasn't stealing," she cried. "I was going to pay it back. I just needed help." He exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "You've said that before." Then she said something that made my blood run cold. "It's not fair, Dad. You gave him everything. He doesn't deserve that house. I do." I saw something flicker behind my father's eyes, a mixture of anger and heartbreak, and I realized Leah hadn't learned a thing. She wasn't remorseful. She was jealous. Even after getting caught red-handed, her instinct was to take more. When he hung up, he looked at me, defeated. "She's gone off the deep end." "Then stop trying to save her," I said quietly. "Let her face the consequences." He didn't respond, but he didn't defend her either. That silence told me he knew I was right. Over the next few weeks, I didn't hear much from either of them. Dad retreated into himself, avoiding calls and visits. Leah vanished completely. No texts, no social media updates, nothing. But I knew her. She was too proud to disappear forever. She was licking her wounds, waiting for the next opportunity to reappear and manipulate her way back into comfort. And I decided that when she did, I'd be ready. That's when the plan started forming. Not revenge for the sake of anger, but justice. A quiet correction of years of imbalance. I began by setting things right in my own life. I sold the old car she'd borrowed without permission and bought a used SUV that I kept locked and tracked. I changed the locks on my doors, set up security cameras, and finally, removed her forwarding address from my mailbox. I cleaned out every trace of her from the house. It wasn't just about safety. It was symbolic. Every item I threw out, her chipped mug, her old hairbrush, the half-empty bottles of perfume, felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. Meanwhile, I started digging. I wanted to know how far her financial mess went, not out of curiosity, but because I knew she'd come crawling back, and I needed to be ready. Through a contact at the bank, an old coworker from college, I managed to get access to some of the public legal filings related to her accounts. It was worse than I expected. Multiple overdrafts, credit card debt in the tens of thousands, even a pending notice from a payday loan service. Leah wasn't just broke. She was imploding. Then, 2 months after the confrontation, I got a call from an unknown number. "Nolan," the voice said shakily. It was her. I didn't respond. "Please don't hang up," she said quickly. "I need your help." I sat down, letting the silence stretch. "What do you want?" "I'm in trouble," she said. I got evicted. I don't have anywhere to go. Dad won't even pick up the phone. Please, I'll do anything. Just let me stay for a little while." The old me would have caved. The one who felt responsible for holding the family together, who couldn't stand to see anyone cry. But not this time. I let her talk, desperate, stumbling over excuses and apologies. And the longer she spoke, the clearer it became that she didn't feel guilt, only fear of losing her safety net. When she paused for breath, I finally said, "You stole from Dad. I told you. I was going to pay him back. You forged his signature." She went quiet. "You've lied to him your entire life?" I continued. "And now you want me to clean it up for you again?" "I just need a place to stay," she whispered. "Please. I'll find a job." "No," I said firmly. "You won't." She went silent for a long time. Then her tone changed, colder, sharper. "You think you're better than me, don't you?" "I don't think," I said quietly. "I just learned." When I hung up, I felt something final click into place. The years of guilt, obligation, and frustration all crystallized into something steady, resolve. I wasn't going to let her drag us down again. But more importantly, I wasn't going to let her keep manipulating Dad. So I called him. "Dad," I said, "she's going to come to you next." He sighed. "She already has. She showed up at my place last night." My stomach tightened. "What did you do?" "I told her no," he said. For the first time, I told her no. That should have been comforting. But I knew Leah too well. She wouldn't just walk away. She'd find another angle. Maybe play the victim, maybe twist the story. That's when I decided to set things in motion. If she wanted to play games, I'd build the board myself. I spent the next week preparing. I met with Dad again, this time to go over his finances with him properly. We closed the compromised accounts, opened new ones under secure names, and set up notifications for every transaction. I helped him draft a letter to his bank, formally confirming the forgery and protecting him from liability. Then I went a step further. I reached out to an attorney, a quiet, meticulous man named Reeves who handled small civil disputes. I told him everything. He listened carefully, asked for the evidence, and after reviewing it, said, if she tries to touch another cent of his money, she'll face legal consequences. We can make that happen. That was exactly what I wanted, not revenge in the traditional sense, but accountability. But I wasn't done. Because I knew Leah wasn't going to stop at Dad. She'd eventually turn her focus back to me. Maybe not immediately, but when her next scheme fell apart. And when she did, I wanted her to realize she couldn't manipulate her way out this time. So I started gathering more, not just financial evidence, but personal. Screenshots of her social media posts bragging about winning, arguments, photos from the parties she'd thrown while claiming she was struggling, even messages she'd sent mutual friends twisting the story to make me look cruel. Each piece went into a folder on my computer labeled restoration. Because that's what this was. Not destruction, restoration. By the time I was done, I had a complete record, a digital reflection of who Leah really was. And deep down, I knew the day would come when I'd need to use it. That day came sooner than expected. Dad called one morning, his voice tense again. She's threatening me, he said. She said if I don't give her access to my savings, she'll go to the police. She's claiming I gave her permission for the transfers. I felt my blood pressure spike. She's blackmailing you? He hesitated. She didn't say it outright, but she's implying I'm covering up something. That was the final straw. Don't talk to her again, I said firmly. Let me handle it. I hung up, opened my laptop, and pulled up the restoration folder. Every piece of evidence, every lie, every theft, all neatly organized. I wasn't sure yet how I'd use it, but I knew exactly where to start. Because Leah had built her whole life on lies, and I'd just spent months collecting the truth. Now, all that was left was to decide when and how to let it out. When I finally decided to act, it wasn't out of anger anymore. It was out of clarity. I'd spent months living with the weight of their choices, and now that I had the truth, I wasn't going to scream or throw accusations. I was going to do what Leah never expected. I was going to outthink her. The first step was simple: let her talk. Leah thrived on manipulation. The more she talked, the more rope she gave herself. So when she texted me out of the blue, "We need to fix this before Dad ruins everything," I didn't ignore her. I replied, "Okay, let's meet." We arranged to meet at Dad's house that weekend. I didn't tell him at first. I wanted her to walk in thinking she was still in control. She arrived looking nervous but defiant, wearing that same mask she'd used all her life, the fragile victim with fire behind her eyes. "Thanks for seeing me," she said as she stepped inside. "Dad's been acting insane. He thinks I stole from him again. But I swear, Nolan, this is all a misunderstanding." I let her talk. She spun her story like she always did, that she'd been helping Dad pay bills, that the signatures were old permissions, that the bank was confused. She even threw in a few lines about how he was losing it and not himself lately. It was textbook Leah. Discredit the other person before they can defend themselves. When she finally paused for breath, I said, "You're right. It's good we're clearing this up." Her eyes lit up with relief. Too soon. I reached into my bag, pulled out a folder, and set it on the table. "But before we do, I think you should see something." She frowned, reaching for it cautiously. Inside were copies of everything: the forged documents, the account statements, the screenshots, even the photo of the note she'd written that said, "Don't tell Dad." I watched her face change as she flipped through the pages. Confusion, then panic, then a flicker of anger. "What is this supposed to be?" she snapped. "Proof," I said quietly. "Of what?" "Everything you've done." Before she could respond, the door behind her opened. Dad stepped in. He'd been waiting in the next room the whole time. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were steady. "Leah," he said, "sit down." She froze. "You set me up?" she whispered, turning toward me. I didn't answer. Dad took the seat across from her, his voice calm but sharp as a blade. "You've lied to me for years. You've stolen from me, from your brother. I gave you chance after chance." She started crying, the kind of tears meant to manipulate, not mourn. I was desperate. "You don't understand." "I understand perfectly," he said. "I'm done being your excuse." He slid an envelope across the table, the official notice from his lawyer. "These are the documents closing your access to every account in my name. The police already have copies of the bank reports. If you contact me or Nolan again, it will be through an attorney." Her eyes went wide. You're turning on your own daughter? Dad's voice didn't waver. I'm protecting what's left of my family. She looked at me, eyes burning with betrayal. You did this. You think you're so righteous, don't you? You've always wanted to see me fail. I met her gaze steadily. No, I said. I just wanted to stop cleaning up your mess. She stood abruptly, grabbing her purse. You'll regret this, she hissed, pointing at both of us. You think I won't survive without you? You'll see. Then she was gone. The door slammed behind her, and for a long time, there was silence. I half expected Dad to break down, but he didn't. He just sat there, shoulders heavy but steady, like a man who'd finally put down a weight he'd been carrying for too long. After a moment, he looked at me. You saved me, he said quietly. And I don't just mean the money. I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded. In the weeks that followed, Leah tried everything. Angry texts, tearful voicemails, even messages from mutual friends claiming she'd changed. Neither of us responded. When she realized we weren't giving in, she tried one last desperate move. She filed a police report claiming Dad had given her access to his accounts voluntarily and then turned on her when she used them. But the evidence I'd collected was airtight. The bank's fraud department confirmed the forged signatures, and her messages contradicted her own story. The case turned against her almost immediately. She wasn't arrested. Dad didn't want that. But the legal warnings and penalties were enough to freeze her credit and close her accounts. Her name became mud in every circle she'd relied on. No one wanted to lend her money. No one wanted to co-sign leases, and her social media slowly went silent. For the first time, Leah had to face a world that didn't bend for her. Dad and I, meanwhile, started rebuilding, awkwardly at first. The trust between us wasn't restored overnight, but there was peace in our conversations now. He came over for dinner sometimes, and we'd talk about small things, work, sports, the garden, the things we never used to make time for. One night, a few months later, he looked around my kitchen and said, "You've really made this place yours." I smiled. "Yeah," I said. "It finally feels like home." He nodded thoughtfully, then added, "I used to think the right thing was always keeping family close, no matter what. But sometimes the right thing is letting go." That stuck with me. The following year was the best I'd had in a long time. I got promoted again, started volunteering at a local mentorship program for teens learning finance. Maybe because I wanted to help someone avoid growing up like I did, fighting for fairness in a house that didn't know what it meant. Dad came to my place for Thanksgiving that year. We sat down to eat, just the two of us, and it felt right. No chaos, no guilt, just quiet gratitude. He raised his glass. "To peace," he said. I lifted mine. To finally doing the right thing. We laughed, genuinely this time. And as I looked around my house, I realized how far we'd come. The silence that once haunted the walls was gone. In its place was calm, freedom, and somewhere out there, I knew Leah was probably still blaming everyone but herself. But that didn't matter anymore. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't living in her shadow or Dad's expectations. I was just living. In the end, the best revenge wasn't ruining her life. It was rebuilding mine. And when I locked my door that night, I finally felt what I'd been chasing for years. Not victory, not vindication, but peace that no one could take away again. My name's Alex, I'm 29, and until last month, I thought I had a pretty decent relationship with my family. Sure, my parents had their favorites. My older brother Ryan was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, but I always thought I was at least tolerated. I'd built a life for myself, worked a normal job, saved up to get engaged to my fiancée, Emma. We were planning a wedding, talking about kids, and I thought I finally had everything figured out. Then the will reading happened. My parents passed away suddenly earlier this year, and we were called to the attorney's office to go over their estate. Ryan strutted in wearing his custom suit, shaking hands with everyone like he was the main character in a movie. Emma squeezed my hand, whispering that everything was going to be okay, that we'd figure things out together no matter what. I had no idea how wrong she was. The lawyer cleared his throat, read the formalities, then got to the part that made my stomach drop. Ryan inherited my parents' $1.5 million penthouse in New York City, their investment portfolio, and my father's entire collection of rare vintage cars. I, on the other hand, was left with the family cabin, an old, falling-apart structure in the woods that hadn't been used in nearly 2 decades. No money, no savings, no car, just a creaking cabin that I hadn't seen since I was 12. Ryan smirked when he heard it, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. Makes sense, he said casually. I'll actually put what they gave me to good use. Alex doesn't even like the city. I sat there frozen, humiliated, my ears ringing. Emma gave me this look, a mix of pity and something else I couldn't quite place. The attorney pushed a few papers toward me to sign, and I did it mechanically, just wanting to get out of there. Later that night, Emma confronted me. She was pacing around our tiny apartment, clearly agitated. Alex, this is embarrassing, she said, almost spitting the words. You can't seriously think we're going to live in some rotting shack in the woods. I tried to calm her down, told her I'd figure something out, maybe sell the cabin and use the money as a down payment somewhere else. But she just shook her head, crossing her arms. You'll never be a real man if you can't provide, she said coldly. That one hit me like a punch to the gut. The next morning, I woke up to an empty apartment and a short note on the counter. Emma had moved out. By the end of the week, I found out through social media that she had moved in with Ryan, my own brother, and was happily sipping champagne on the balcony of what used to be my parents' penthouse. I didn't yell. I didn't call anyone. I just grabbed my keys, packed a few bags, and drove out to the cabin. The place was even worse than I remembered. Broken windows, moss growing on the roof, the front porch sagging under its own weight. But something about standing there, looking at what was supposed to be my inheritance, flipped a switch inside me. I decided right then I wasn't going to beg for scraps. The first night, I barely slept. The forest was quiet, the air heavy, my thoughts running wild. I kept replaying Ryan's smug face, Emma's words, the lawyer's indifferent tone. I felt small, angry, humiliated. But the next morning, while clearing out the old pantry, I found something. And that's when everything changed. I woke up to the sound of creaking wood and bird song, the kind of silence that's almost too quiet, like the whole forest is holding its breath. My back ached from sleeping on the old couch, but I dragged myself up, determined to at least make the place livable. The cabin smelled of dust and mildew. The kitchen was a graveyard of rusted cans and warped wood, and the floorboards groaned like they might collapse under my weight. I started cleaning, partly because it needed to be done, partly because I needed to keep my mind from replaying Emma's words on a loop. You'll never be a real man. I could still see her face when she said it, detached, disappointed, like I was some project she had wasted time on. Every sweep of the broom felt like I was pushing that memory further away. That's when I found the trunk. It was wedged under the kitchen counter, covered in dust and cobwebs, and locked with a heavy, rusted clasp. At first, I thought it was just an old toolbox, but when I dragged it out, I saw that it was carved with my grandfather's initials. My grandfather had built this cabin himself back in the 1960s, and I remembered him as this gruff, quiet man who never really spoke much at family gatherings. I tried to pry the lock open, but it wouldn't budge. It felt heavier than it had any right to be, and just moving it to the corner of the room left me sweating. I decided I'd deal with it later. I had enough problems to handle right now. That night, my phone buzzed. It was a family group chat message from Ryan, the first in months. He'd sent a photo of himself and Emma in front of the penthouse window, champagne flutes raised, city skyline glowing behind them. The caption read, "Finally living the life Mom and Dad wanted for us. Cheers." The message stung more than I wanted to admit. I stared at the picture for a long time, the champagne glass in Emma's hand catching the light, her smile so bright and fake it almost blinded me. I didn't reply. Over the next week, the messages kept coming. Photos of Ryan's business dinners with influencers and investors. Videos of the parties he was throwing at the penthouse. Emma posing with some of Mom's jewelry that I hadn't even realized was gone until then. It was like they were deliberately shoving their happiness in my face, reminding me of what I'd lost, or maybe what they thought I never deserved. Then came the phone call. "Alex, buddy." Ryan's voice was loud, too cheerful. "Listen, I just wanted to check in. Make sure you're not falling apart or anything." "I'm fine," I said flatly, staring out the window at the tree line. Good, he said, chuckling. "You should come visit sometime. The place looks incredible now that Emma's here. We redecorated. You wouldn't even recognize it. Oh, and thanks again for not making things messy at the will reading. I know it must have been hard for you, but hey, Mom and Dad knew what they were doing. They always said I had the drive to take care of the family's future." I bit the inside of my cheek so hard I tasted blood. "Sure, Ryan." Glad you're enjoying yourself." He paused, then added in a softer voice, "You know, Alex, maybe this is for the best. I mean, you're not exactly cut out for city life. That cabin suits you. Quiet, simple, no pressure. You can just be. And, hey, if you ever decide you don't want it, I can find a buyer for you. Probably won't get much, but at least it'll put some cash in your pocket." I hung up before he could say another word. After that call, something shifted in me. The humiliation started to burn less and calcify more, turning into something heavier, something sharper. I spent my days tearing out rotten planks, fixing what I could, salvaging tools from the shed out back. Each nail I hammered felt like a way to reclaim control, to build something of my own, no matter how small. One evening, while rummaging through the attic for insulation, I found a faded envelope tucked under a loose floorboard. Inside were a handful of old black and white photographs. My grandfather standing in front of the cabin with a group of men I didn't recognize, all of them in suits, shaking hands. In the background, there was a massive piece of machinery, half covered with a tarp, and behind that, stacks of something that looked like crates. On the back of one of the photos, in my grandfather's precise handwriting, were the words, "November 1964. The first shipment is secured. Never let the land go." I sat on the attic floor for a long time, staring at those words. The first shipment of what? What was so important that he wrote a warning to keep the land? The next day, curiosity got the better of me. I drove to the local town hall and asked about the property records. The clerk dug through some old files and confirmed that the land around the cabin had never been sold, divided, or developed. In fact, there was a note in the file indicating that there had been a permit request denied in the 1970s for mineral exploration. That night, I sat in the cabin, staring at the locked trunk again. My hands itched to know what was inside. I didn't have the tools to break it open, but I made a mental note to get a crowbar the next time I went into town. Before I could leave for supplies the next morning, another message came through from Ryan. This time it wasn't a picture, it was a video call. Against my better judgment, I answered. The screen lit up with Ryan and Emma lounging on the penthouse balcony. Ryan had his arm around her, grinning like he'd just won a prize. "Alex, there you are," Ryan said. "Listen, we've been talking. We think it would be great for you to sign over the cabin to us. I mean, let's be real. You don't have the money to keep that place up. It's going to fall apart eventually, and when it does, it's just going to cost you more than it's worth. We could renovate it, maybe turn it into a vacation rental. You'd still get to visit if you wanted to, and we'd cut you in on a small percentage of the profits." Emma nodded like it was the most reasonable suggestion in the world. "It just makes sense, Alex. You don't even like being out there, do you?" I stared at them for a long moment, my jaw tight. "No," I said finally. "I'm keeping it." Ryan's smile faltered. "Come on, man. Don't be stubborn. This is what's best for everyone." I said no. I repeated and hung up. I expected anger, but instead what I felt was a strange calm, like I had drawn a line in the sand for the first time in years. That night, as the wind howled outside and the cabin creaked around me, I took the crowbar I'd bought and jammed it under the trunk's rusted clasp. With one good heave, the lock snapped. Inside was something that would change everything, but not in the way I expected. When the lock broke with a loud metallic crack, dust flew into the air and caught the light streaming through the cracked window. My heart was pounding like I had just committed a crime. I slowly lifted the lid, half expecting to find nothing but old blankets or broken tools. Instead, what I saw made me sit back on my heels, stunned. The trunk was packed with documents, maps, and what looked like several sealed metal tubes, each stamped with my grandfather's initials and a date. The papers on top were brittle but legible. Geological surveys, hand-drawn diagrams, and letters written between my grandfather and a man whose name I didn't recognize, but whose letterhead listed him as a director at some mineral company I'd never heard of. I spread the papers out across the kitchen table. The more I read, the faster my pulse raced. My grandfather had discovered something on this land, something big. The surveys showed high concentrations of rare earth minerals, the kind used in technology manufacturing. There were notes about keeping the land quiet until the market matures, and even a signed agreement with a clause that mentioned a future buyout option. I sat there for hours, piecing it together. If these documents were still valid, and I had no reason to think they weren't, this land was worth far more than I could have ever imagined. I wasn't just sitting on some dilapidated cabin. I was sitting on a fortune. For the first time since the will reading, I felt a flicker of hope. Not just hope, power. But before I could even decide what to do with this discovery, Ryan made his next move. 3 days later, I came back from a supply run in town to find a sleek black SUV parked outside the cabin. Ryan was leaning against the hood, wearing his usual smug grin. Emma sat in the passenger seat, scrolling through her phone like she couldn't be bothered to look up. "What are you doing here?" I asked, keeping my voice level. Ryan spread his arms like we were old friends. "Relax, little brother. I just came to talk. In person. You know, like family." I didn't invite him inside, but he walked in anyway, looking around like he owned the place. "Wow," he said, wrinkling his nose. "This place is even worse than I imagined. You're actually staying here?" No wonder Emma left. This is depressing. Emma snickered softly without looking up from her phone. I gritted my teeth. "Get to the point, Ryan." He turned to me, his expression suddenly serious. "I'm making you one last offer. I've got a buyer lined up who's willing to take this dump off your hands for more than it's worth. You sign the papers, you get a nice chunk of change, and you don't have to waste the rest of your life rotting out here." I crossed my arms. "No." Ryan's jaw tightened. "Alex, you're being ridiculous. You're sitting on a liability. This place is a money pit. And let's be honest, you've never been great with money. You're going to lose it all eventually anyway." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. I said no. "And if you ever show up here uninvited again, we're done. Don't call me. Don't text me. Don't show up. I don't care if you think Mom and Dad would have wanted this. I'm done being treated like the family disappointment." For a moment, I thought he might back down. Instead, he smirked, shrugged, and walked out. 2 nights later, I woke up to the sound of crunching gravel outside. I peeked through the window and saw headlights. Before I could react, I heard footsteps on the porch and then the unmistakable sound of the front door being tried. Someone was trying to get in. I grabbed the heavy flashlight I kept by the couch and swung the door open, heart hammering. The beam of light caught 2 figures, Ryan and one of his friends from the city. Ryan threw up his hands. "Whoa, relax. I was just checking on the place. You didn't answer my calls." "It's 2 in the morning, I said, my voice shaking. "Get off my property." But Ryan didn't leave. Instead, he took a step closer, lowering his voice so his friend wouldn't hear. "You're going to regret this, Alex. You think you can play tough guy, but you're not. I'm going to make sure you have no choice but to sell this place." He left after that, but I barely slept for the rest of the night. The next morning, I found the trunk overturned, papers scattered across the floor. I had locked it before going to bed. Someone had been inside while I slept. Panic rose in my chest as I frantically gathered everything back up. The documents were still there, but some of the maps were missing, the ones that showed exactly where the mineral deposits were located. I felt sick. Ryan must have seen them. He knew what the land was worth now. Later that afternoon, I got a call from the county inspector telling me there had been a complaint filed about the cabin being unsafe and a potential hazard. If it failed inspection, I'd be legally required to vacate until repairs were made. Repairs I couldn't possibly afford on my own. I didn't have to guess who had filed the complaint. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the trunk, my fists clenched so tight my knuckles hurt. This wasn't just favoritism anymore. This was war. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't planning to roll over and let Ryan win. The inspector showed up 2 days later. He was a tall, tired-looking man with a clipboard, boots still muddy from the last property he had been to. He walked through the cabin with the kind of detached professionalism that made me nervous, scribbling notes and shaking his head every so often. When he finished, he stood on the porch with me and let out a long sigh. "Look, son," he said, almost kindly. "This place is barely holding together. You've got structural damage in the porch beams, mold in the kitchen, and the roof's about 5 years past due for replacement. You don't have to vacate yet, but if you don't get this place up to code soon, I'll have to mark it condemned. You understand?" I nodded stiffly, trying to keep my voice even. "How soon is soon?" He looked at his clipboard. 90 days. Maybe less if there's another complaint. 90 days. 3 months to fix a cabin that was falling apart, with money I didn't have and no one willing to help me. When he left, I sat down on the porch steps and put my head in my hands. The forest felt too quiet, like it was listening. All at once, the anger and humiliation that had been building for weeks came crashing down. My parents' favoritism, Ryan's smugness, Emma's betrayal. It all felt like it was closing in on me. I stayed like that for hours, until the sun sank below the trees, and the cabin was just a dark silhouette behind me. For the first time since this whole mess began, I wondered if maybe Ryan was right. Maybe I should just sell it all, take whatever money I could get, and disappear. But then I thought of my grandfather's notes, his warning, never let the land go. That night, I had a dream about him. I was a kid again, sitting on the cabin porch while he whittled a piece of wood into the shape of a bird. He didn't say anything. He never was a talkative man. But in the dream, he handed me the bird and nodded toward the trees, like he was telling me to look deeper, to pay attention. When I woke up, the feeling didn't go away. I spent the next week in a fog, but it wasn't the kind of fog that paralyzed me. It was the kind that hides you while you think. I made lists of everything that needed fixing: new roof panels, replacing porch beams, clearing out mold. I started selling anything I didn't absolutely need, tools I could live without, the old furniture that was beyond saving. The money I got wasn't much, but it was enough for materials. I worked from dawn until late at night, hammering, sawing, hauling debris to the edge of the property. My hands blistered, my back ached, and sometimes I would just sit down in the dirt and stare at the ground, wondering why I was doing all this for a cabin that my own family clearly thought was worthless. And then another blow came. One afternoon, as I was replacing a section of the porch railing, a delivery truck pulled up. The driver handed me an envelope and drove away without a word. Inside was a letter from Ryan's attorney, a formal notice of intent to sue me for withholding family property of significant value. He claimed that the land contained mineral deposits that rightfully belonged to the family as a whole, and that I was refusing to act in good faith by not selling. I laughed out loud when I read it, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh that comes right before a breakdown. They weren't even pretending anymore. This wasn't about helping me or keeping the cabin safe. This was about taking what I had left. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the table with the trunk open, spreading out the documents again, this time looking for something, anything, that could protect me legally. Most of the letters were about the land surveys and mineral rights, but then I found something I hadn't noticed before, a notarized letter from my grandfather, dated the year he died. It said, in clear language, that the land was to remain in my family line, but under no circumstances was it to be sold outside of it. There was even a clause stating that whoever inherited it would have sole discretion over its use. I felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief because it meant Ryan didn't have a legal leg to stand on. Dread because I knew that wasn't going to stop him from trying to make my life miserable until I gave in. The next morning, I drove into town and met with the only attorney I could afford. He was an older man, semi-retired, with an office that smelled like old books. He read through the letter and nodded. "You're in the clear," he said. "Legally, you own this land outright. If your brother tries to sue you, it won't go anywhere." I should have felt better, but I didn't. Because Ryan didn't fight fair. 2 days later, I came back from hauling lumber to find the front door kicked open and the cabin ransacked. The trunk was still there, but its contents were gone. Every map, every letter, every scrap of proof that my grandfather had ever written anything about the land. I called the sheriff, but he shrugged. No sign of forced entry except the door. No fingerprints. Unless you have proof of who did it, there's not much we can do. I knew it was Ryan. Of course it was Ryan. That night, sitting in the empty cabin, I felt something break inside me. Not the kind of break that leaves you shattered, the kind that leaves you cold and quiet, like a piece of metal that's been tempered in fire. I wasn't going to fight him the way he wanted me to. I wasn't going to beg or plead or sell. If Ryan wanted a war, I'd give him one. But on my terms. For the next few weeks, I stopped answering his calls. I let him think he'd won. I focused on repairing the cabin, on keeping my head down, on quietly gathering whatever I could to replace what was stolen. I went back to town hall and requested copies of the property records, then drove to the county archive to see if they had duplicates of the old surveys. Slowly, a plan began to form, one that would not just protect the cabin, but make sure Ryan and Emma could never touch this land, or me, again. And when the first letter from Ryan's lawyer arrived, threatening further legal action, I didn't panic this time. I smiled, because now I knew exactly what I was going to do. The weeks that followed were the first time in months I felt something close to control again. Every morning, I woke up with purpose. My hands were still calloused and sore, but now they moved with a steady rhythm instead of desperation. I replaced the broken porch beams one by one until the structure stopped groaning when I stepped outside. I patched the roof with new panels I bought using the last of my savings, sealing out the cold drafts that had been creeping through every night. The cabin began to feel less like a crumbling inheritance and more like something I was actively shaping, mine, in every sense of the word. It still wasn't pretty, but every nail, every plank of wood, every patch of mold I scrubbed away felt like taking back a piece of my dignity. I also threw myself into the paperwork, almost obsessively. The day after the break-in, I had gone to the county clerk's office and explained what had happened. To my surprise, they were sympathetic. Apparently, I wasn't the first person in this county to deal with a sibling who thought they were entitled to land. The clerk helped me locate duplicates of several key documents, including the mineral surveys and my grandfather's notarized letter. They even suggested I file to have the land officially recertified under my name with a fresh deed, a process that would make any future challenges from Ryan more complicated. I spent hours poring over those documents, scanning them, uploading them to secure cloud storage, and even mailing certified copies to myself so there would be a time-stamped record. If Ryan wanted to play games, I was making sure I had backup pieces for every move. During this time, I also started digging deeper, figuratively and literally. One afternoon, while clearing brush near the shed, I found the remnants of an old wooden marker buried halfway in the ground. When I dug around it, I uncovered a second marker, then a third, forming a rough triangle. The area inside the markers was just flat earth, but something about it felt deliberate, like my grandfather had marked it for a reason. I borrowed a metal detector from a guy in town and spent 3 evenings sweeping the marked area. On the third night, I got a strong hit near the center and started digging. About 3 feet down, I hit something solid, a metal box. Inside was a set of vials, each labeled with dates and numbers, along with a letter from my grandfather. The letter was short, but it confirmed everything. These vials were samples of the rare earth minerals, proof of their purity and potential value. There was even a note about contacting a particular company, only when the time is right. I sat there in the dirt, holding those vials in my hands, and felt something like electricity run through me. This wasn't just an inheritance anymore. This was leverage. The next day, I called the company listed in the letter. It took some digging to get through the layers of receptionists and middle managers, but eventually I spoke with a senior representative who nearly fell silent when I mentioned my grandfather's name. Apparently, he had been a respected prospector in his day, and they still had records of his work. Within a week, a geologist from the company drove out to the cabin to take a look. He spent a full day surveying the property, and by the time he left, he looked almost giddy. "You're sitting on a gold mine," he told me, though gold wasn't even the right word. "These deposits are in high demand right now. If you play your cards right, you could make a fortune." He gave me a ballpark figure, and I nearly choked when I heard it. Hundreds of millions. More than I could have ever dreamed of having. I didn't sign anything right away. I wasn't about to rush into a deal just because I was desperate. But now I knew I had options. Real ones. Meanwhile, Ryan kept trying to get under my skin. I ignored his calls, his texts, his lawyer's letters. I let him think I was hiding away, beaten and broke. Little did he know, every day that passed I was getting stronger, physically, financially, emotionally. The cabin became more than just a shelter. It became a base. I cleared out the spare room and turned it into an office, with a second-hand desk and a computer I bought using the small loan I got approved for from the local credit union. I hired a surveyor to draw up official maps of the land and its resources, this time with my name clearly stamped on every page. Word started to spread in town. People who had once looked at me with pity, the younger brother who got the short end of the stick, now stopped by to ask about the renovations, to see what I was building. A few even offered to help with the repairs in exchange for a home-cooked meal or a favor down the road. Slowly, I felt a community forming around me, something I hadn't had in years. One evening, while standing on the porch watching the sun set through the pines, I got a message from Ryan. This time it wasn't a demand or a threat. It was a photo of Emma standing in the penthouse kitchen, holding what looked like one of Mom's necklaces. The caption said, "She looks good in what was meant to be yours." For a moment, the old anger flared hot in my chest, but then it burned out just as quickly. I didn't reply. Because I had something Ryan didn't know about, something bigger than a penthouse, bigger than jewelry, bigger than whatever games he was trying to play. And for the first time since this whole nightmare started, I wasn't scared anymore. I was ready. The next morning, I got a call from the mineral company's legal department. They were interested in negotiating a deal, one that would involve not just buying the mineral rights, but potentially giving me a percentage of the profits from future extraction. I told them I'd think about it, but inside, I was already planning. I wasn't just going to sell and disappear. No, I was going to make sure Ryan and Emma saw exactly what they had thrown away. The call from the mineral company replayed in my head for days. It was tempting to accept their first offer. It would have been more money than I had ever seen in my life, but I knew better than to rush. Ryan had taught me something, though he'd never realize it. Power isn't just about what you have, it's about timing. If I was going to make my move, it had to be when I was at my strongest and when he least expected it. So I got to work. First, I hired a better attorney. The old man I'd met earlier had been helpful, but I needed someone who could play hardball if Ryan tried to drag this into court. I found a young, sharp real estate lawyer from the city who specialized in land disputes. Her name was Claire, and after one look at my grandfather's documents and the new surveys, she grinned like a chess player seeing checkmate 10 moves ahead. "Your brother doesn't have a case," she said flatly. "But that doesn't mean he won't try to create problems for you. What you need is to make this airtight. No cracks, no loopholes, no room for him to argue anything. We'll register the mineral rights under your name, get everything notarized, and put a legal shield around the land so strong he'd need an act of Congress to break it." For the first time in my life, I wasn't just reacting to Ryan's games. I was building something he couldn't touch. At the same time, I started playing a longer game. I reached back out to the mineral company, not to accept their offer, but to negotiate. This time, I asked for things I never would have dared a month ago, not just a buyout, but equity in their project, royalties tied to production, and a clause requiring them to keep my name as the legal owner of the land. To my surprise, they didn't shut me down. In fact, they seemed impressed. "You know what you have here," the representative told me over the phone. "Most people would just take the lump sum and run." I smiled, though he couldn't see it. "Let's just say I've learned not to let other people decide my worth." While those negotiations were in motion, I also invested in myself. I took a few online business courses, learning about land management, mineral rights, and contract law. Every evening, I sat in the cabin's office with a notebook, scribbling down strategies, planning every step. And slowly, almost without realizing it, my life started to shift. The cabin was no longer a symbol of humiliation, it was a fortress. The repairs were almost done, the property was secure, and I had even installed a new locking system and cameras to make sure Ryan couldn't sneak in again. One afternoon, while I was stacking firewood, a black SUV rolled up the drive. For a moment, my stomach dropped. I thought Ryan had shown up again, but when the door opened, it wasn't him. A woman in a navy suit stepped out and introduced herself as a representative of the mineral company's executive board. She had come personally to present their new proposal, a revised contract, with a figure that made me feel dizzy when I saw it. Not just a payout, a partnership. "If you sign this," she said, "you won't just be wealthy. You'll be on the board of directors for our regional development project. This is long-term generational wealth we're talking about." I asked for a few days to review it, though my heart was already beating with anticipation. This was more than I had ever dreamed possible. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, staring at the stars. For months, I had been humiliated, pushed down, treated like I didn't matter. And now I had a decision to make. I could quietly take the deal, disappear into a new life, and let Ryan think he had beaten me. Or I could do what every part of me now wanted to do. Let him see just how wrong he had been, and make sure he understood exactly what he had thrown away when he chose to betray me. The choice became clear the next morning when I got an email from Ryan's lawyer threatening to file a motion to freeze the property, pending division of assets. Claire laughed when I showed it to her. "They don't even have standing to do that," she said, shaking her head. "But if you want, we can file a counterclaim, one that makes them pay for harassing you." I felt something click into place then, like the final piece of a puzzle I hadn't even realized I was putting together. I wasn't just going to protect what was mine. I was going to make them regret ever thinking they could take it. I started keeping a careful record of every threat, every message, Every call from Ryan and Emma. I had screenshots, printed copies, even saved voicemails. Claire helped me draft a formal cease and desist letter, one that spelled out exactly what would happen if they continued: financial penalties, legal fees, and a possible harassment case. And then I did something I knew would get under Ryan's skin more than anything. I invited him to the cabin. Not to negotiate, not to argue, just to catch up. I told him I had something to show him, something important. When he arrived, he was wearing that same smug grin, but I could tell he was curious. I led him inside, past the repaired porch, the fresh paint, the now pristine kitchen, and into the office where the new surveys and contracts were spread across the desk. "This is what you've been trying to steal from me," I said quietly, sliding the documents toward him. "And this is what you'll never have." For the first time, I saw something flicker across Ryan's face. Not anger, not smugness, but fear. He didn't say much when he left, but I knew this wasn't over. And that was fine, because now I was ready for whatever came next. Ryan didn't come back right away, and that was exactly what I wanted. The silence gave me room to move, to set things up just the way I needed. Over the next few weeks, I finalized everything with the mineral company. Claire reviewed every line of the contract, tearing through it like a hawk until there wasn't a single loophole left. By the time I signed it, I had secured not just a massive upfront payment, but a percentage of future profits that would keep money flowing for decades. The wire transfer hit my account 3 days later. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just financially stable, I was untouchable. I sat in the cabin's small kitchen, staring at the numbers on my laptop screen, and let out a long, slow breath. This was more than winning. This was freedom. But I wasn't done yet. I waited until the deal was fully public, until the mineral company announced their new extraction project and the county posted the notices in the paper. The town was buzzing with the news. People stopped me in the street to congratulate me. I could almost feel Ryan's world closing in as he realized what had happened without him. And then, I made my move. The first thing I did was send Ryan and Emma a certified letter through my attorney. The letter laid everything out: the sale of the mineral rights, the amount of money involved, and a very clear statement that they had no claim to a single cent. It included copies of my grandfather's notarized letter, the property deed, and a legal notice informing them that any further attempts to harass me or interfere with the property would result in a civil suit for damages. But I didn't just want legal victory. I wanted them to see what they had lost in person. So I planned a gathering. Not a party exactly, but a sort of unveiling. I invited neighbors, a few local officials, even the mineral company's representative. And yes, I invited Ryan and Emma too. I knew their pride wouldn't let them stay away. The day of the gathering, the cabin looked better than it had in decades. The porch was solid, the windows replaced, the kitchen gleamed with fresh paint. I had even hung some of my grandfather's old tools on the walls, turning them into a display, a reminder of where all this started. When Ryan and Emma arrived, they stepped out of their car dressed like they were going to a charity gala. Ryan wore a suit, Emma a designer coat. I could see the way they looked around, taking in the repairs, the freshly cleared yard, the stack of firewood I had cut and stacked by hand. "Wow," Ryan said, forcing a smile. "You've really fixed the place up." "Thanks," I said calmly, as if we were just neighbors making small talk. "Come on in. There's something I want you to see." Inside, I had laid out the contracts on the table, the official ones, stamped and signed, with all the numbers in plain view. The mineral company rep stood next to me, smiling politely as Ryan and Emma approached. "What is all this?" Ryan asked, his voice tight. "This," I said, gesturing to the documents, "is what you've been trying to get your hands on. The land's mineral rights were sold last week. The upfront payment cleared my account 3 days ago. And these," I tapped the pages showing the royalty agreement, "mean that every single year from now on, I'll make more than you and Emma could spend in 10 lifetimes." Emma's face went pale. Ryan's jaw clenched. "And just so we're clear," I continued, my voice steady, "you have no claim to any of it. Legally, financially, morally, this is mine. You tried to break into my home. You tried to take what was left of our family's legacy. You even sent inspectors to shut me down. And for what? So you could sell it for a fraction of what it was worth and buy yourself another car." Ryan opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. "Save it. You don't get to spin this. Not anymore." Claire, who was standing quietly in the corner, stepped forward and handed Ryan an envelope. This is your formal notice. Any further harassment will result in immediate legal action, including claims for damages and emotional distress." For a moment, the room was dead silent except for the crackle of the fire in the wood stove. Ryan looked like he wanted to explode, but he didn't. Instead, he grabbed the envelope and stormed out, Emma following behind him without a word. The rest of the gathering went on as planned. The neighbors congratulated me. The company rep shook my hand. And when everyone finally left, I stood alone on the porch watching the taillights of Ryan's car disappear down the dirt road. It should have felt like victory, but it was more than that. It felt like closure. The next day, I saw the first ripple of what I'd done. Ryan posted nothing on social media. No champagne photos, no smug captions. Friends who used to fawn over his lifestyle started reaching out to me instead, curious about the project, asking if there would be jobs available when development began. It was subtle at first, but I could see it happening, the balance of power shifting. For years, Ryan had been the golden child, the center of the family's attention. Now, he was just a man who had thrown away his last chance to be part of something bigger than himself. And I wasn't finished yet, because there was one more thing I wanted them to see, something that would make sure they never forgot the choice they made. 2 weeks after the gathering, I got the call I'd been waiting for. The mineral company's public relations team was hosting a press event to formally announce the start of their project, and they wanted me there as the official landowner and partner. I almost said no at first. Part of me just wanted to stay in the cabin, enjoy my peace, and let the world forget about Ryan and Emma. But then I thought about the years of being ignored, dismissed, told I was less than. I thought about the will reading, about Ryan smirking in his expensive suit while I signed papers like an afterthought. And I thought about Emma's voice in our apartment, cold and sharp, telling me I'd never be a real man. So I said yes. The day of the event was bright and crisp. The company had set up a stage on the edge of the property, near the marked area where the first drilling would begin. Reporters from the local paper were there, along with several county officials and even a few curious neighbors. And just as I suspected, Ryan and Emma showed up, dressed to impress, as if they could somehow spin this to their advantage. When I stepped up to the podium, there was a ripple of camera shutters. I wasn't used to speaking in front of a crowd, but I felt strangely calm. "I want to thank everyone for being here," I began, my voice carrying over the microphone. "This land has been in my family for generations. My grandfather built the cabin behind me with his own 2 hands, and he left it to me with one clear instruction: never let the land go." For a while, I didn't understand what that meant. I thought it was just a burden, just a broken-down reminder of everything I didn't get. But I see now he knew what was here. He knew what it would mean one day, not just for me, but for this entire community. I gestured toward the company representatives. "This project is going to bring jobs, growth, and opportunities that will last for decades. And I'm proud to say I'll be here for every step of it, making sure it's done right." There was applause, polite at first, then louder, with a few cheers from the neighbors who had watched me fight to rebuild the cabin. I glanced toward Ryan and Emma. Their faces were unreadable, but Emma's eyes darted away when she caught me looking. After the event, reporters asked for photos, and I agreed. They took shots of me shaking hands with the executives, standing by the survey flags, even in front of the cabin. By the next morning, my face was on the front page of the local paper under the headline: "Local man partners in $600 million deal. Revitalizes historic property." That headline spread faster than I expected. Within days, people from outside the county were reaching out: investors, journalists, even distant relatives I hadn't heard from in years. For once, I was the one being celebrated. And that's when the fallout started. Ryan called me late one night. His voice was tight, brittle, like something inside him was cracking. "You humiliated me," he said flatly. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. "No," I said calmly. "You humiliated yourself. You had every chance to be part of this, Ryan. All you had to do was treat me like family. Instead, you tried to take what wasn't yours. You sent inspectors, lawyers, even broke into my home. And you think I humiliated you." There was silence on the other end, just his breathing. "Stay away from me," I said finally. "Stay away from this land. Stay away from my life. You made your choice." I hung up before he could answer. 2 days later, I got a message from a mutual friend in the city. Apparently, word of Ryan's failed lawsuit and his attempt to sabotage me had started to spread. Some of his business partners had pulled out of deals, and one of his clients had dropped him entirely, citing concerns about his judgment. Emma, meanwhile, quietly moved out of the penthouse. I only knew because she posted a cryptic message online about starting fresh. She didn't contact me, and I didn't contact her. Whatever they had, it clearly hadn't survived the pressure. The last time I saw Ryan was 3 weeks later. I was driving back from a meeting with the mineral company when I spotted him standing by the cabin's gate, leaning against his car. For a moment, I considered driving past, but something in me wanted to end this face-to-face. I parked and got out, walking toward him. He looked smaller somehow. The suit was gone. His hair was messy. He didn't have that smug grin anymore. "You win," he said simply. "This was never about winning," I replied. "It was about keeping what was mine. You turned it into a war, Ryan. I just refused to lose." He nodded slowly, then got back in his car and drove away. I watched the dust trail fade behind him, and for the first time in months, I felt completely still inside. That night, I sat on the porch of the cabin, watching the stars come out over the pines. The air was cool, the woods quiet except for the soft hum of crickets. In the distance, I could see the marker flags where the first phase of work would begin. I thought about my parents, about Ryan, about Emma, about everything I had lost and everything I had gained. And then I smiled. Because this cabin, this land, this life I had built out of the ashes, it wasn't just mine. It was a monument. A reminder that sometimes the best revenge isn't shouting or fighting or tearing someone else down. It's standing tall, unshaken, and letting them see exactly what they threw away. I leaned back in the porch chair, took a deep breath of the cool night air, and whispered to the trees, almost like I was speaking to my grandfather. I kept the land, and for the first time, it felt like the forest whispered back.